Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score. I'm Dan Schneier. That's Jacob Gibbs. And today we're joined by a special guest. He was on the show last year as we tried to kick things off. Before we get into that, I want to take you a little bit through my hectic life right now. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but there's massive construction undergone in this house. And this construction started in January. It's the end of July. There's no timeline in sight. I won't show you this entire room. You can see the wall stripped down behind us, but I don't know what's worse for today. One, me not being able to unloosen the microphone stand, so I have to hold the microphone in this new room. Two, me recording from a room without air conditioning because they're working in the room. Or three, me complaining about any of this when I get to talk about fantasy football and I get to talk to Rich Hribar and Jake Gibbs. So first of all, Rich, thank you for joining the show again. We're really excited to talk to you today. And Jacob, how are you doing today, my friend? I'm going to throw it to you first.
I'm doing so good. I've been sitting here waiting for you guys for 50 minutes now. No, I tweeted the wrong time. We're all disorganized today, but we got a chance to talk to Lord Reebs, which we're very excited about. We're going to talk about offensive play designers and play callers and try to sift through like who are some of the best ones and who help for fantasy the most. And I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion because we've got some really trendy guys, but we've only seen them do it with like a few teams, like 1 to 3 years with some really elite talents around them. How do they stack up compared to somebody like Mike McDaniel, who has a little bit longer of a track record, and then obviously like some of these like Matt LaFleur, somebody who gets slept on a lot that has been doing it at a really high level for a long time. And I don't think there's anybody better to do it with than Lord Reebs, who has just like all like. You guys know I go deep with the data, but he's been doing this for how long, Reebs? 15 plus years, like just unbelievable wealth of knowledge that he has and is able to bring all of that team level stuff, all the historical context, and just blend all that together and help us contextualize and get a better understanding of what we're looking at and what 2025 might bring us. So this is like just such a treat to me. I've been so psyched for this one.
Before we get into all that, I do want to mention a couple more things. First of all, we are a new show, Beyond the Box Score. We've expanded this year, multiple shows per week in your podcast feed, in your YouTube feed. We're going live. We got more planned for the season, but we need your help. Please do us a favor if you're watching right now. Hit the like button. Just as I always like to say, hover that hand over the mouse. It's a 1-second process, and it really changes a lot for us. Last year, you guys all did a great job of hitting the like button, leaving comments. That's another thing we need. That's 2 things. And then subscribing. It really helped us take the show off. So want to make that clear at the beginning, at the end as well. And finally, this is July. End of July, early August. You know what that means for fantasy football today in CBS Sports? It's draft-a-thon months. That means we are raising money for St. Jude, the best cause, my favorite time of the year, my favorite thing I get to do at this company. If you want to help us and join our cause, you'll find a link in this episode. And also, you can check out our Tiltify page to donate there. I will leave a link in the comments after the show there. But without further ado, Reebs, let's get into this thing and let's start to talk about which play callers can help our fantasy managers listening get a little edge for the season.
Yeah, I came on last year and, I checked out some of the comments from the show and they're all like, oh, I don't want to hear Reebs talk about play callers on the show. I wanted to hear about like his picks. And so I appreciate Jacob he was like, I'm just going to design the show around play callers now.
Yep.
So I appreciate that, so.
That's what we're here for, Reebs. Like, I'm not worried about that at all. Yeah, this is Beyond the Box Score. Reebs was our first guest last year, and that was such an awesome podcast, and we really appreciate having him back on. First guest this offseason. And, there might be a few comments here and there, but you can't listen to just those, like we've got so many people that are psyched for this.
I am someone that does like to check out the comments, though. I know a lot of people say don't read the comments, but some of the best, actual advice and things that changed that I've done with either my approach or my setup has come from either commentary. When I worked for NBC, our actual personal emails used to be attached to the articles to where like you could just like send me an email. And I actually had like a really great, like awesome critique from someone. I still have it saved in my file about like, changing up some of my writing. So I'm someone that doesn't have a writing background. I had like a football statistical background. And I was actually into fantasy baseball is how I got into this field. But some of the best advice I've gotten, it's sure there's trolls and you have to wade through some stuff, but you gotta have thick skin and let that stuff deflect off you. But some of the commentary that you get and actually actual feedback, can definitely help you and help, definitely improve some areas that maybe you're overlooking. So I do appreciate everyone that still does comment and, lets me know if I'm doing something wrong.
I think that's a great point. I think any great fantasy show has a great fantasy community. And that's what we're trying to build at Beyond the Box Score. We set the foundation for that last year, and we've seen it in the comments. I see some of the same people who were listening last year joining in with us. And today, obviously, as we go live, we'll see that as well. Leave your comments, by the way, if you're listening live. We'll try to get some of those questions on and try to feature them at some point. But yeah, Rich, I'm gonna let you take over here because I know you've got some good data, and we're gonna have fun going through these play callers.
Yeah. I think Jacob's gonna do the tier maker, so he's gonna. You guys can steer the ship. I'll just add some commentary while I have a conversation. However, you guys envision this thing going, we'll try to figure it out.
All right, yeah. So I've got I uploaded about 10, 12 photos here to the tier maker list, and this is I think the first time this has been done. It's just like the friendliest offensive mind. So I do first think like there's a distinction between good play callers and good play designers. They're not always the same thing.
Right.
I think, like somebody like Bobby Slowick was a good example of somebody who had a lot of the principles of like play designs that have worked, but the actual play calling and sequencing didn't come together all that well. And then something that Reebs really does a good job of is like understanding pace of play and who's creating like total numbers of play, target distributions, and how like they become concentrated for some teams compared to others. And what factors lead to that. So somebody like Kellen Moore, who maybe gets slept on a little bit, has been pretty good for fantasy. So I've got the names I've got here are Ben Johnson, Kevin O'Connell, Matt LaFleur, Liam Coen, Clint Kubiak. Maybe too early, almost definitely too early, but we'll see. I really want to hear Reeb's thoughts on him, so I did put him in. Kellen Moore, Mike McDaniel, Todd Monken, Sean Payton, and then of course, like my presumed S tier here is Kyle Shanahan, Andy Reid, and Sean McVay. I think there are some names that are on the outside looking in, like obviously, what about what we saw from Washington last year? That was a huge surprise to me and Dan. So yeah, let's just dive in here.
Where's Arthur Smith?
Where not on here, but I will hear you out if you think
No.
he's designed some efficient offenses. Let's just start at the top. I think we've got to put these three. Does anyone have any disagreements with our S tier, starting with Shanahan, Reid, and McVay?
I think just in general, like kind of some context of where the league is at right now. We did see the league bounce back last year in terms of offensive production, coming out of the COVID 2020 and 2021 seasons where like offense was just kind of silly willy because, 2020 had no fans. Like especially if you look like the home road splits that year and like red zone production and offensive like line penalties were just all like way out of whack with like historical trends because there was no fans at any of the games and scoring just went nuts. And we came out of that like 2-year COVID period where defenses really had an upper hand on offenses. And last year we started to see offenses really kind of counter and punch back. And it was something I think I talked about on the show was, as defenses were going to start playing lighter fronts and play like more base nickel, the counter was like that, McVay, Shanahan style of an offense where you're playing bigger sets, you hold offensive leverage, you're playing more under center. We're gonna run the ball if you're gonna play coverage, and we're gonna throw the ball when we suck you up with the run game when we're beating you. We'll probably talk about this with Mike McDaniel, what happened to that last year. But we saw last year, I mean, there was 100 more touchdowns, 96 more touchdowns last year than there was the year before. We saw 12 personnel go up to the highest rate ever. 3 wide receiver sets dropped to their lowest rate since 2019. And like under center passing and play action stuff like that stuff remains a cheat code. And we'll probably echo that throughout some of these, coaching, breakdowns as well. But yeah, you look at even like a guy like Todd Monken getting Lamar Jackson, even under center, just had his career high rate. And it's like the efficiency and the cheat code that is really undervalued. So I'm looking at still teams to attack this because your game, a lot of gamers in your fantasy league haven't accounted for this yet still, is like these teams that play with offensive leverage. Like these are big, especially if like late round quarterbacks. Almost every late round quarterback hit that's a pocket passer has come from like one of these systems or plays in like an environment that is very similar to where these two coaches kind of come from.
Yeah, let's just give a shout out to Ryan Heath on McShanahan. He's trying to get the McShanahan tree going, and I like that. I think that's easy. And yeah, I shout out to Reebs last year for putting this idea in my head. He basically was like, I think you could draft teams that are only from the McShanahan trees with maybe, if you add in Andy Reid and Ben Johnson as well, and that would probably be a pretty good team. And did you end up doing that? Did you end up actually writing?
I did a few, and there was definitely some hits, guys like T Higgins, but there was misses. Obviously, Tyreek Hill had his worst season of his career, so it's still like volatile. But when you look at a lot of like the big hits that like players that beat ADP, like they were kind of guys from either those two systems or adjacent systems that play like with a lot of offensive leverage, like more under center stuff. We saw that with Liam Coen too, as well, who's an interesting player, part of this conversation. The sample size isn't huge, but it's definitely intriguing, the sample size we have.
One thing that stands out to me about the three play callers up top there, and I would actually argue Sean Payton belongs in that tier as well for me. And one thing that stands out about those four for me is that they are the best, and this is something Rich just mentioned with offensive leverage, at marrying the run and the pass game. The only way you're going to marry the run and the pass game together is to be under center. It's not going to work out of the shotgun. And I think they've understood that. They've realized that. I actually think Ben Johnson as well does a really good job of that. I might put him in that mix. And we'll get into a lot of this today, Rich.
And that's the guesswork, right? With Caleb. Because Caleb's a guy going back to college, like just hasn't been asked to play under center a lot. Exactly. And but we saw this with Kellen Moore going to the Eagles last year. He didn't turn Jalen Hurts into just a complete under center player. They still ran a lot of that, like Monken and Lamar. You still ran a lot of shotgun, a lot of pistol, but they increased the rates. It's not they're going to run every play out of under center. It's just getting more access to those plays that are more fantasy friendly and more efficiency friendly for your real life production.
Yeah, there's no doubt about. Yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
Reebs, we just did an episode on Tuesday that was like cheat codes for fantasy, and it was the obvious ones like Konami code, shout out Reebs, and then like running back, receiving, and then maybe like some more team level stuff that is talked about a lot, but I think a lot of people might not think about when they're drafting people. I think generally we draft player first, which I think makes sense. You want to draft the talent, but like there's so many things that can elevate a player, like Puka Nacua, to just this fantasy monster because of the offense that he's playing in. And so we try to hit on play action, pre-snap motion, and then route concepts. Are you familiar with horizontal routes and the data that Fantasy Points data has been putting out in terms of how much more efficient those have been than like vertically breaking routes or static routes coming back to the ball in terms of drawing targets, but also producing fantasy points?
I mean, I haven't really dug into it, but just inherently for all the things we talked about, like where the meta has been defensively, like that just inherently makes a ton of sense, with a lot of the zone-based stuff. I mean, Ben Johnson was someone who did this with Jameson Williams a lot last year, especially as the season went on with Jameson Williams. It wasn't just Jameson Williams running by dudes. They ran a ton of mesh and stuff where he was catching the ball, almost full speed across the field and just no one could catch him afterwards. But a lot of that is on the Jameson Williams stuff. So I definitely buy a lot of that, having a lot of rollover to efficiency because the way teams are combating the defensive meta right now.
Just furthering that for a second from a schematic standpoint, something again that Jacob brought up on last episode and Rich has followed up on. Mesh is definitely a good way to beat it, but mesh is like a man beater. And I feel like the guys who are up top in our rankings right there, the Shanahan, the McVays, those are the guys that are best, and even Ben Johnson, those are the guys that are best at using horizontal breaking routes to beat zone. And I feel like they've done the best job of that. Even Sean Payton, I was going back through Bo Nix tape and I was like, there were so many examples of him having a freed up wide receiver breaking on an in, on a deep in or a intermediate in cut. And this is the area right now where I think you can beat the way that, like you talked about the defensive meta, and we've talked about this a lot on this show with how so many teams are like from the Fangio tree right now. And that means kind of either cover 3, cover 2, cover 6 type of looks. This is the way to beat it. And there's not that many other areas of the field where you can consistently beat it. So I put these play callers up there. And I think from a fantasy standpoint, people are asking us in the chat, I'm reading the chat, like, what does this mean for how you guys rank your fantasy players? I just think it leads us to believe that these are the offenses that can be more consistent and more productive overall.
Oh, you muted.
Jacob on mute, trying to talk right now.
This is why I'm so excited for Clint Kubiak. It's coming out a small sample size, of course. We have to take that grain of salt with everything we say about him. But if you looked at, especially the early season film, his route designs were clearing about as much space as I see from anybody. I think Matt LaFleur is up there and Shanahan is up there, but the horizontal route rate went way up for both Olave and Rashid Shaheed from what we had seen previously. And so many of these plays, especially the deep play action dropbacks and stuff, there were just like tons of space when they were getting the ball. And I think that's going to work really well with Jackson Smith and Jigba like we talked about. So yeah, the guys that were at the top in this horizontal route breaking stuff was like all the obvious ones, and then Dave Canales, which I thought was really interesting. Do you have any thoughts on him? Because I don't feel like I hear people talk about the Panthers' offensive design all that often.
No, he was Liam Coen before Liam Coen, right? Like he was last year's Liam Coen was the coup. He was resurrecting He was the first guy to resurrect Baker Mayfield, and then Baker Mayfield took another step forward in a different capacity in Liam Coen's system because there's a lot of quick hitting stuff, a lot of stuff behind the line of scrimmage. But yeah, Dave Canales was kind of the last year's Liam Coen, but definitely like I'm excited to see what he does with Tet McMillan on that stuff because that's what we got to see him do with Mike Evans the year before. And he didn't really have that guy last year. We knew Xavier Legette was going to be kind of a project, coming into the NFL with the way he got his targets at South Carolina that last year. And they just didn't really find a position for him in year one. And I'm very curious to see now where he falls. He feels very positionless again too. But yeah, I'm very excited to see what Tet McMillan can do on a lot of that stuff that Mike Evans was working on, 2 years ago.
Yeah, me too. I think he's going to have a huge year.
And he's good after the catch.
Yo, for sure. Yeah, more than people realize. I've got two players that we didn't get to in the last episode that I want to hit on the horizontally route breaking stuff. It's Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr. I promised the people that we would get to them today. And I want to throw it out to Rich because I thought you might be interested in this stuff. And then we'll take a break and we'll get into actually ranking some of these play callers. So what I've got on the screen here for the YouTube audience is target heat maps. And so you see here, we've got Mike Evans in 2023, and it's like way more on the sideline and deep down the field. And then in 2024, it's way more focused on the middle of the field. And so that is, as we talked about in last episode, a big note for Brian Thomas Jr., I think. And we saw Evans had one of the most efficient seasons he's ever had under Liam Coen. And so we're very excited for Liam Coen. This is just one of the many reasons. What he did in the run game was amazing as well. But so Malik Nabers, I can't get over this. The reason the horizontally breaking routes are so important for fantasy is they result in a huge increase in targets, the likelihood of drawing a target. And Malik Nabers, if you see this demon chart I've got here on the screen, he just didn't get hardly any of those looks. He had a really low overall horizontally route breaking rate in the offense. And then also when he was running anything deep in, he just was not targeted. He was basically only targeted on the sideline and then in the short area. So it was basically like deep goes. Occasionally they would throw it up, but most of it was just not getting to him when he ran those types of routes. And still, Malik Nabers had one of the highest target shares that we've ever seen for a rookie, which just blows my mind given the usage because his route tree was so vertically oriented and he just was still able to like shatter any previously held target share numbers without the boost of the horizontally breaking routes. And so I think just like long term, it's such a bullish note for him because like if they are able to run just a more functional offense where they don't have to like work around so many weird limitations, I think Nabers could easily push up to just like 35% target share numbers because he's open on so many of these routes. He's like wide receiver 2 in separation on post routes on so many of these routes. He's just crushing and just not getting the ball. And so it's just like I'm sorry to be so fixated on it, but like I can't like anytime we see a receiver push into the 30% range, it's like the offense is facilitating that. It's like perfectly built around getting them the ball. Nabers, it wasn't like that at all. And he's nearing the Puka Nacua type of target share numbers. And so like, what if at some point we find some coherence in the offense that's built around him? How silly could it get? I really think it could just get out of control where he's just broken for fantasy. The talent is obvious. The other guy I wanted to talk about was Marvin Harrison Jr. So Marvin Harrison Jr. was third in the NFL in the percentage of his routes that were play action horizontal routes. I think people got really frustrated with Drew Petzing, but the more that I dug into the route data for MHJ, it seemed so clear that the Kyler Murray complainers were right. So like MHJ crushed on dig routes in terms of separation and win rate, but he's only targeted on 10% of those routes. All the over the middle stuff, the target rates were really, really low, which is the whole, that's like the whole ethos of the Kyler complainers case is that like he can't make those throws. But But as far as what Petzing actually did, early in the year, it was a ton of, X receiver, deep ball stuff. His horizontal route was 33%. But after the bye, it was 41%, which is pushing up into that range that we really like. Mike Evans last year, when his rate got into that high range, it was 40%. So MHJ was right at that level. And they really did a good job of getting him those looks specifically off of play action plays, which is just even further boosting the efficiency. And I did just want to bring that up because the film is scattered for MHJ. There's a lot of 50-50 balls that he loses. And it's clear that he's not on the same page with Kyler a lot of the time. He's not as fast as you would hope for a generational prospect and all of that. But I think that there's a pretty clear plan in place for him that does involve more than just go win outside at X receiver. You know what I mean? And so I think that his target share could rise a lot from what we saw last year. I do wish that we were getting a discount on him. We're really not. He's still like a 3rd or 4th round pick. That's my only problem with him for fantasy. But I think as a long-term note, I was actually pretty encouraged when I dug into his route stuff.
Harrison's a really interesting one. As we head into this season, he bulked up, which I don't necessarily love when it comes to, but if it means winning off the line of scrimmage and they're going to try to utilize his release package, which is borderline elite, I thought, at Ohio State, on some more quick hitting stuff, that's good. The timing to me still remains a work in progress with Kyler Murray, so we'll see what happens. But I do like the numbers you just put up, Jacob. That is giving me some reason to be more of a believer. And then on the Nabers front, I think the sky is the limit. I mean, he's already received 50% of Russell Wilson's targets in 2 camp practices. This is an offense that is designed to get him the ball, and they understand they understand what they have there. So we'll talk more about those receivers and different play callers and how they impact different fantasy receivers and quarterbacks and running backs. But before we do that, we need to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors.
Hi. Novocaine?
Novocaine! Novocaine is now streaming on Paramount Plus.
You're gonna love this.
Oh, you're strong! It's wildly entertaining and an absolute blast.
I'm in.
Novocaine, rated R, now streaming on Paramount Plus.
All right, so on the screen here, I've got play action and pre-snap motion. If you see the top right, these are the teams that are doing the most of both. This isn't a perfect chart because I think the Falcons were really low in play action, but that had a lot to do with Cousins and what was going on with the health of his ankle last year. The Packers are a little bit lower than usual. Same with the 49ers. I think that had to do with the 49ers with the loss of Trent Williams, with the Packers with the loss of Jordan Love. So some of these I think will even out. But in the top right here, you basically have all the teams you'd expect: the Chiefs, the Vikings, the Rams, the Dolphins, the Lions, and then the Chargers. And I wanted to bring them up to Reebs because I think that people get kind of frustrated with the play calling there at times. I think the big limiting factor for me when I dig into them is just total play volume for somebody like Lad McConkey. But did you have any Chargers thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Greg Roman, I think, falls in there. I know he's not on there. He falls in I think, archetype that you kind of laid out. I think as a play designer, is more of a strength than particularly as a play caller, especially run game design. And that's going to be interesting too. Your Drew Petzing, is he the new Greg Roman? Because we know you brought up all the Marvin Harrison Jr. stuff. We don't know if it's a chicken or egg thing with Petzing versus Kyler Murray, right? Is it a Kyler Murray problem? Part of my theory too has been in this current defensive meta with all the, cover 4, cover 6, Fangio stuff, is that these shorter quarterbacks we've seen the issues. This has basically ruined Russell Wilson's career. Russell Wilson was going to the Hall of Fame until this era popped up. And the same thing happened to Deshaun Watson, who has a very similar play style to Russell Wilson when he came back from that layoff. Teams started to, because those guys want a big game hunt. They don't take a lot of those free squares. They want to extend plays. They want to push the ball vertically downfield. NFL defense was no, we're not doing that. And those guys aren't the biggest guys. And guys like a guy like Kyler, who's historically had trouble throwing over the middle of the field, even when his players are open. Is that a Petzing problem or is it a Kyler problem? Because anytime that the Arizona Cardinals had to throw last year, and the defense knew they had to throw, the offense completely caved in on itself. They had 7 passing conversions on 3rd and long last year. It was the fewest of the 2000s. You look at when Kyler had to throw vertically, absolutely awful the past 2 years at the bottom of the league. In the fourth quarter when they were trailing, you look at his numbers in that when teams know that they have to throw. His rating dropped to 76%. His touchdown rate went under 1%. So like, is it a Kyler problem or is it a Petzing problem? I still think that remains a question because we only have the sample of them together. Roman has a little more history, bopping around. I do think people took the wrong signal away from the Chargers last year, especially the back half of the year when they did increase that pass rate over expectation because they had to. They couldn't run the football efficiently at all. And then you look at way the season ended for the Chargers. They go to the playoffs. They lose a game where their quarterback throws 4 interceptions and they run the ball 18 times for 50 yards. I know it's under 3 yards per carry. I know it was like 2.7, 2.8. But do you think Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh really looked at each other after that game and was like, yes, this is the brand of football like we want to play? So what happens? In the offseason, they throw a bag at Mekhi Becton. They initially add Najee Harris, and they use a first-round pick on a running back. Like this team is not going to change. Like they still want to do what these two guys and their flesh and blood have shown us they always want to do. Like they want to play more power football, more balanced football. They couldn't run the ball at the end of last year. It's why their running backs were available. It's why J.K. Dobbins didn't sign until after the draft. It's why Gus Edwards is still out here available. So I do think that play volume is concerned. That's my one problem because I want, dude, Lad McConkey's so good, man. Like he's so good. But like when you are staring at him in the second round, especially when he comes up even against like the 2 tight ends, like everyone just projects for way more targets than him. Like it's hard to tell yourself a story where Lad gets like 150, 170 targets. And that's like the toughest part of like getting him in the second round. But I will say you just bet on talent in those situations. He's so good. But yeah, I definitely figure like place Roman into that same archetype of like great play designer. I still think like play calling is a hang up of his.
Yeah, I had to bring them up because like McConkey is somebody who's so easy to pump a lot of exciting stuff out there on, and all the horizontal breaking route stuff looks really good on him. The play action is great. And so I wanted to point out that Roman does use these efficiency boosters. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Chargers were 29th in offensive plays created last year. Only the Jets, Panthers, and Jaguars had fewer. And so, yeah, it is the target conundrum is just clear when you're comparing him to the other guys in the second round. It's kind of like Bucky Irving in my mind, where it's like the player's amazing. I think that the offense could be pretty good, one of the best ones potentially on an efficiency basis. But like the volume is so much lower than the players who go around him in that range.
Yeah. The closest thing is I would say like from a fantasy stance, like a volume stance, he's like somewhere in between AJ Brown and Zay Flowers. Cause like Zay Flowers, we know is a really good player too, and runs into these similar volume concerns because of the system he's in, but like AJ Brown on just a per target basis, though, just offers so much more upside than both of those players in terms of being able to produce touchdowns and then create stuff after the catch. Not that Lad and Zay are bad after the catch at all. It's just that AJ Brown is a different type of animal because people forget those first 2 years that AJ Brown was with the Eagles. He was knocking on the door of 150 targets both years and, had 1,500 receiving yards both of those seasons. And you look at what happened to the Eagles last year, who have our number one schedule adjusted flip this year. They go from the 4th easiest schedule to the hardest schedule this year in terms of, passing. They faced 10 teams that were playoff teams last year. So like they're going to get pushed a lot more. AJ Brown under 2 targets per game in the second half last year because they just didn't have to throw. Like they're going to get pushed a lot more. So, I mean, I look at AJ Brown in that second round range and it's hard for me to not feel comfortable about him. So, but he's somewhere in between, like from a volume perspective, those two guys we know are also great players too. Yeah.
Just some good context here for people because it's so easy to get excited about Lad and just, he's the young guy. We've seen AJ Brown for a long time. It's just like, well, I'm just drafting Lad over him, but it's like, really, they're kind of the same outline in terms of how they get their
they're not similar archetypes of players is what I'm saying. I'm saying from like a volume efficiency stance, like that's like where and we've seen AJ Brown get those targets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen AJ Brown be the top target earner on a per route basis in the NFL over multiple seasons. Like we've seen him be an absolute alpha. McConkey, we think, can maybe be that. The route running is good enough that it could be that, but we've never really seen that. All right, let's get back to our rankings here. Shanahan, Reed, McVay. Is there anyone else that either of you would throw out as potentially belonging in S tier? We got Sean Payton, LaFleur, KOC. Anybody else that you guys would put in this range?
Payton definitely get there for me.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rich.
I was gonna say, Sean Payton's an interesting conversation because we're gonna talk. I think of Broncos several times are gonna come up during this podcast, but Yeah, I think Sean Payton, when you look at like his historical trends, I mean, 6 yards per play, his offenses, like of the guys that, Jacob has in this list, the only guys higher are Kyle Shanahan, Ben Johnson, and Mike McDaniel, is tied with him. So like that speaks for itself. Pass rate over expectation is high. And the under center stuff we like. He really, really coaxed out kind of a faux Drew Brees type season from Bo Nix last year. Bo Nix, threw behind the line of scrimmage at the third highest rate in the NFL last year. He had 7 passing touchdowns on throws that didn't even go past the line of scrimmage. It was the most in the NFL. His stuff when he had to hold the ball longer than 2.5 seconds was really bad. The real red flags of Bo Nix really showed up in those situations. My one thing that I do want to see this Broncos team do, though, that I still have a kind of a question mark on Sean Payton, I do have some faith here, though, is they're going to have to punch up this year. There's no sneaking up on anyone this year. Like, this is a team that really took advantage of their schedule as well last year, and they have a complete flip because they overachieved last year. Bo Nix, especially the passing game. Like, we've seen this team not generate points against good defenses, and that happened in the playoffs. I really want to see the Broncos answer that question in terms of punching up this year. And do they have the talent to punch up is another question. I mean, this is a team who still, when you look at their best offensive players, are still Cortland Sutton, Evan Ingram, and a rookie running back in RJ Harvey, who comes from a Gus Malzahn system. Like, there's an adjustment period coming from him too. Like, it's going to take some of that Sean Payton magic, is what I'm saying, is because they go to the 26th hardest schedule this year. So I really want to, this is going to, like I said, if they get there this year, I think it's going to cement Sean Payton as like an S tier guy.
And I think, just to follow up 1 second on that, I think the stat you brought up is the reason I'm so sold on Sean Payton belonging there. The stat that when Bo Nix did have to process, and the play did go longer than 2.5 seconds, and it wasn't just Sean Payton designed it, it's there post snap. Things got really sticky there. And the difference between when it was designed really well versus when it was on the quarterback, to me, is like what stands out. Because I've seen with McVay, at least, Stafford do some really good processing. And I've seen with Purdy, people are so anti-Purdy. I love Purdy's tape. I've seen Purdy do that as well. I've seen a little bit less of that from Bo Nix.
Yeah, I think he belongs at least in A tier, and there is a real chance that he is in this exact same range with the top guys, depending on how this year goes. Because the offense was really good last year with, like Reebs said, like Cortland Sutton, and that's it basically. And we've got some real weapons this year. I'm excited for it. I want to talk about Mike McDaniel next. I think we absolutely would have been putting him in like this range before last year, and now people are pretty down on him. But if you look at the offense, it was still really efficient last year. Even the passing offense was like top 5 in most metrics, and so we're getting to the point where it's like, is he truly a good enough play designer that he can just circumnavigate any set of, bad circumstances that come his way and give us results similar to Kyle Shanahan? Did you have anything on Mike Reebs? Where do you think he belongs here?
Yeah, I'm still very high on Mike McDaniel. And I know that in totality, from a top-down stance, it wasn't as effective last year what Miami did offensively, but they had some really cattywampus splits that I think are going to correct themselves this year. I mean, well, first of all, just the quarterback injury, right? Like, their season was once again impacted by Tua, and we'll see if that ends up being a thing. He hasn't played a full season yet in the NFL, but they average 5.5 yards per play with Tua on the field compared to 4.5 yards play without him. That's a difference between 14th in the NFL, which is respectable, to dead last in the NFL. And without Tua, they were dead last in like third down conversion rate. So like all this stuff happened, but what really happened though is what we led off with is Miami wasn't able to push people out of the shell coverage like they were the first 2 years in Mike McDaniel's tenure with the Miami Dolphins. I mean, no team faced 2 high safeties at a higher rate than the Dolphins last year, and they couldn't get anyone out of it because they couldn't run the football as effectively as they did the first 2 years under him. And then teams were just able to take away all those explosive plays. The Miami Dolphins, the fastest team in the NFL put together, had 3 touchdowns passing outside the red zone last year. Like, absolutely just a criminal number. Like, for when you think of their playmakers that they have in terms of Devin Achane and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They had 13 the year before that, 10 the year before that. The offensive line, I do believe, is in a better place than where it was last year. You look at Devin Achane, he was hit at or behind the line of scrimmage on 44% of his runs last year. As a rookie, it was 33%. Jalen Wright was hit at it behind their line of scrimmage at over 50% of his runs last year. So even if you say from a top-down service level, yeah, that we have a left tackle concern, but getting Austin Jackson back on the field is going to be massive for this. Austin Jackson has pass protection concerns, but Mike McDaniel's been able to scheme around that. It's Austin Jackson's run game influence that's so important for this offense. You look at his splits with on and off the field. Devin Achane, almost identical carry numbers: 92 with Jackson on the field, 111 with him off the field. His success rate goes from 37% to 45%. His explosive run rate doubled last year from 7.2% to 14%. His stuff rate went from 27% down to 21%. And then we'll see what the two interior guards do. Aaron Brewer is already a really good center for this system, a guy get out and move. We'll see what James Daniel coming off the injury does, and then the second round draft pick Savanea does. But this team was so influenced by just injuries. I mean, their most frequently used offensive line combination last year was on the field for just 35% of their offensive snaps last year.
Yeah.
So like if they're able to just run the football better, it's going to pull some of those teams out of that coverage because they're going to have to respect the run more. And then you're going to start to see some of those chunk plays that were void from this passing game a year ago. And this directly ties into why Jonnu Smith has many targets as he did last year, and why Devin Achane had as many targets as he did last year. And it's why Tyreek, like on a separation level, looked like he had issues, because that stuff defenses were able to take away. And same thing with Jalen Waddle. Like those guys just completely fall off the map in terms of explosive plays because this offense caved in on itself because they weren't able to push teams out of that shell coverage. They do face 10 opponents this year that were top half of the league in single high safety stuff last year, but it just all depends. They do that against Miami? Is there like a calibration and they force Miami to do that? So those are all kind of things that I think are going to play into the Dolphins kind of rebounding. But McDaniel still did all the pre-snap motion stuff we love, all the play action stuff, and he still coaxed out enough production to be a competitive football team while Tua was on the field to still give him kind of the benefit of the doubt for me.
And like you brought up, I think the offensive line is the most overlooked thing here. The injuries to the offensive line, that's so hard to overcome for any team. Before, he had gotten by with like 22nd to 28th offensive line play and was able to just work around it and still like get the ball out so quickly that it didn't matter. But last year, it was just about as bad as it gets. I've got several charts that just like always have Tua down at the bottom when it comes to offensive line play, and that affecting him. And the other thing is defenses did just stop blitzing. They just didn't even worry about blitzing Tua. It's been developing this way since he got into the league, but like last year, his blitz rate was 18%, which is like almost half of the league average. It's so low. And it's just got so weird with the Dolphins last year. But I do have faith that we could see him. We could see something from Mike that helps alleviate some of the junk that's gone on, where it's just so congested that defenses like know exactly what to do to stop this offense. I think with better health in the offensive line, we could see a bounce back.
And this defense looks significantly worse in the back end than it's been in recent years. They're going to be, I think, pressed to score points as well. And that's something I think that we look from a fantasy stance. Like we want that tempo and we want to be able to push the scoreboard. That their secondary looks like a lot of question marks right now.
I've got a stat that I'm curious what you think about this. I dug into pre-snap motion and how it affects the run game. I think we typically focus on the receivers and stuff.
Yeah. I did some stuff on this too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. During the Mike McDaniel era, the Dolphins have averaged 3 yards on 268 static rush attempts. So it's a pretty decent sample size. And they've just been so bad on them. The highest single season rate was 3.3. So we've seen, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay also like boost their run games with pre-snap motion, but they've still been able to like have a competent run game without it. And I would love to hear what you think about this as it pertains to Mike McDaniel, because clearly he's helping. There's the offensive line and the running back talent before Achane wasn't anything special really, and he's still been able to have really good run games because of what he's doing to boost it. But do you think it is potentially a negative that like it has to be the motion or it doesn't work?
I think it all depends on what the opposing defense is doing to you. Because both of these coaching trees that we talked about, the Mick Shanahan stuff, like all these guys have coached around kind of inferior offensive lines. I wouldn't say like they've had bad offensive lines, but you never consider, like very rarely have these teams had like the apex offensive line on paper. They're able to coach around some of that stuff. But one of the things that's happened in the NFL, we talk about like the Fangio stuff, right? And it's not just the quarters, the cover 6 stuff. It's the match coverage that's happened, right? Where you're getting some of that, like, man mixed in. It's a zone, but it almost like is still like has a lot of man principles involved with it. And what the pre-snap motion does was, because what happened when you go back to like the Chiefs stuff, because the Chiefs are like the influence of like where all this started, right? And it was the Tyreek stuff, ironically. Is that teams were starting to show one look pre-snap and, disguise stuff afterwards. Brian Flores, this is like his whole MO. But now what offenses have done to counter that is now used motion as a signal, as to say, like, all right, now if we're going in motion, what can we change in terms of the look and diagnose what you're going to do pre-snap, and change some of the match assignments to kind of, have busted plays. There's a really great clip of this. If you go back a couple years ago, I'd have to search for it, where Josh Norris and Hayden Winks from Underdog were talking with Trevor Lawrence, and they talk about a play that they ran that got the this is in their comeback when they beat the Chargers in the playoffs, and they came back like down at half, like, what was it? It's like 27-3 or something. And they ran a play where like they used the motion and got the Chargers out of like, they busted their match, and it was like a free touchdown. I think it was Zay Jones, like just caught like a bomb. And that's why we've seen pre-snap motion, kind of, have its influence right now. It's because of all the disguise stuff. It's giving offenses, that initial clue as well. So that's where Mike McDaniel's trying to get to process some of that stuff early on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm really curious to see. So where do you guys think that he does belong? Because so much of it is kind of speculation on a rebound this year. If we're going to put him up where he has been, are you guys comfortable with A? Is he B, or would you go lower?
I'm putting him up. I'm putting him up in A. I really liked what Rich broke down, because one thing that really stands out to me, and I want to make this clear because we talked about it at the top, and it's really worth repeating. When we're talking about where these defenses are moving, and from that meta standpoint, it is important to note that they're all playing pattern match, which is what Rich brought up. So it's not like full zone like you would think in Madden. And that's why I want to that's just one more reason to put McDaniel up top here, because he's been on the forefront of using pre-snap motion and using different ways to kind of get an indicator. Okay, am I going to be fit? What am I facing post-snap? All the NFL is at this point is confirming what you see pre to post snap. And a lot of the times the good defenses are, especially against the worst quarterbacks processing wise, are fooling the quarterbacks. I think what McDaniel does is give his quarterback a little bit of an edge, or I don't want to even say edge, a little bit of an easier processing period. And I think that's what he's done with Tua. So for that, and it was a great point by you, Rich, I want to move him all the way up there, because I don't view that as a negative, that they've been a much better team running the ball while using pre-snap motion. I think that's a positive.
And these are for fantasy too. These are, fantasy football.
Well, these are just play callers, because like if we were grading just like these guys as coaches, like Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan does a bunch of shit we don't like as a head coach.
Oh, yeah, so does Mike McDaniel. Andy Reid.
Kyle Shanahan's basically lost 2 Super Bowls.
I just want, on the McDaniel thing before we go to break here, I just wanted to point out that this is not just what we think of them as play callers for real life, but like how they affect fantasy ultimately. And so with him, so much of his offenses that we've seen have been super concentrated in the target share to just like 1 or 2 guys. And he's consistently produced fantasy relevant running backs too.
I've been really toying with moving Devin Achane over Jahmyr Gibbs, but I just don't know what the new offensive coordinator is going to do in terms of Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Like, what if they want to give Jahmyr Gibbs, like we finally get to see a larger run out for Gibbs. But I think that is just me even considering that, just as a testament of that Devin Achane does belong as a first round pick.
I love it.
All right, let's take another quick break here. Word from our sponsors. We're going to get back into some more play callers and where they rank for us.
The crowd loves champions. Gladiator 2 is an epic spectacle.
Remarkable!
To amuse you is my only wish.
The glory is yours, not mine.
Very good. Gladiator 2, rated R, now streaming on Paramount+.
All right, let's have the Ben Johnson discussion. First in offensive plays last year, tied with the Browns, which Stefanski definitely belongs on this list, by the way. As I looked at this, I was like, that was a clear oversight. But I guess it's just because like it's hard to get excited for anyone on the Browns for fantasy. But Ben Johnson is not hard to get excited, and we all are very excited. First in offensive plays, I think they were 3rd the year before that, and it's just been, if you look at when he took over, it's just been a steady incline year over year. just a complete print shop for fantasy. The rushing, the under center stuff to result in play action efficiency that's just off the charts. Created almost 2,000 PPR total points last year. The Bucs were the next highest. They were the only other team above 1,900. So they're just like way above the rest of the field. More play action points, more play action fantasy points created than any team has in the time that I have the data available. Truly just like a heavenly place this Ben Johnson offense has been for fantasy football. And it also has been pretty hyper concentrated on like the main pieces. And then the running back room is the one area where it's not. And I'm really curious because I feel like there could be some value in this backfield, but I don't really feel all that confident in any of the individuals you have to click a name on. So I'll throw it to you, Reebs. I'm sure you've got some goodies on Ben Johnson. Take it wherever you want.
Yeah, I think just with Ben Johnson is we're gonna finally get like full on clarity of like his opportunity, right, to like cement where we believe he's like the next, like where we were considering like Mike McDaniel a couple of years ago. He could just be the next like great offensive mind. Everything he did, just to echo what you said, all the under center stuff, the horizontal routes, the play action. I mean, if you guys are watching like the QB show on Netflix, like every time Goff brings up something, it's like stems off something Ben Johnson brought up and created, and it's just like, all right, like, so it's just getting Caleb Williams now to harness things that we haven't seen Caleb Williams harness. And because he's not going to try to turn Caleb Williams into Jared Goff. Why would he, right? That's not what good coaches do. But we do need to clean up a lot of things for Caleb Williams that he's had, over his, college career and then his first year in the NFL. Obviously, the pressure to sack stuff, the throwaway stuff, the bailing from clean pockets, and inaccuracy stuff. He already came out, I think it was earlier this week. He said he wants him to complete 70% of his passes. To me, that shows like they're going to do a lot more, like, a lot more stuff near the line of scrimmage than he was forced to do, as a rookie. Obviously, they add Luther Burden, they add Colston Loveland, two guys who, operate. I will say though, Luther Burden, a lot of people think him as like the slot guy. He's way better like as a vertical receiver than like a zone nuanced guy. Like he's actually a pretty poor like route runner in terms of like nuance and zone and like creating space. I think Matt Harmon's work shows this too. Like every time I watch Luther Burden now, I was like, man, they should be running this dude downfield more. Like he's way better at like, creating separation downfield, and he's like a really poor feel for zone. But I definitely think they're going to throw some stuff near the line of scrimmage more. I won't take up all the shot clock here because I do think it like DeAndre Swift is interesting. But I'm curious to get Dan's thoughts too.
I mean, the most interesting player by far for me as this situation, as we get the switch over of Ben Johnson going to Chicago, is Colston Loveland. He was somebody who was talked up a lot by Ben Johnson just yesterday at training camp. Just talk about he's the first in, first out. But for me, it's not that. It's watching his tape at Michigan in that system with that kind of quarterback play, similar to when I watched Nico at Michigan. I kind of had the idea of like, there's a lot of meat left on the bone for Loveland. Mm-hmm. And then I think about just the ways that Amon-Ra St. Brown has won in that Lions system, and I don't think they're too dissimilar to the ways that I expect Loveland to win at the NFL level from a projection standpoint. So that's the first and foremost. I do agree with you on Burden. Burden was a player I think is a bit miscast, though. The issue I have with Burden is I wonder how much of his usage in the slot at Missouri is because they didn't trust him to do other things, and that's something I've read about. I don't know. I don't think I agree with you. He's not the most nuanced wide receiver right now, but there's obviously something that Ben Johnson sees in him. So I'm monitoring how both of those players are going to be used. But for me, the whole Ben Johnson debate for me, Reebs, and this is going to come down, we're going to bring this up a lot throughout the show. It's going to hit when we talk about Liam Coen with the Jaguars. It's going to hit when we talk about Clint Kubiak with the Seahawks. How much of Ben Johnson's success was predicated on having Frank Ragnow and Penei Sewell alongside three other usually competent to above average starters on that offensive line? Because that's the same issue I'm going to run into when trying to project Liam Coen, because I do not believe in this Jaguars offensive line at all. And it's the same issue for Clint Kubiak for me, because I do not believe in that Seahawks offensive line at all. And the Bears offensive line is the most improved on paper, but I do feel like I need to see it a little bit before I believe it. So for me, when it comes to Ben Johnson, this is a big prove it year, because I just want to see how these play callers interact without elite options on the offensive line.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's why we can't put him in S, because like this is the test, right, to get to S.
I agree with that. Jacob, your thoughts on that?
I think, A is where he belongs, because we need to see him prove it. And it's, him and Liam Coen both had just phenomenal situations here. I did love that Rich brought up quarterback the show, because I've enjoyed that so much, that he's never the rah-rah guy, and he is emotional. He does get excited. I think he will fire people up. I'm excited to see how he does as a head coach. But like, there's so many other things going on in Detroit, that he's almost always like the background guy, but he's like the background guy for almost every good thing. It feels like they always end up like cutting back to Ben Johnson, and he's just like the genius behind what happened. I'm really excited to see what he does for Caleb. I've been bringing up on the screen for the YouTube watchers. Caleb's splits are much, much better with play action. And then this stat is just so crazy to me, how efficient the tight ends have been on play action targets in this offense. So I said that this Detroit offense in 2024 scored more play action fantasy points than any team since I have the data available. And the most efficient per target guy within that play action data was Sam Laporta. And we've actually seen two other tight end seasons that have been more efficient than Sam Laporta's season was last year on a per play action target basis. So I'm just so stoked for Colson Loveland. And
they're going to play more 12 than I think, that's what made the Burden selection so interesting. But it could also be a longevity thing too, because maybe, DJ Moore is not motivated in this system, and maybe he's not on the roster, come as early as next year or 2 years from now. So it could have been like a foresight pick too with Burden, that maybe he just, wanted that insurance. But they're definitely going to play more 12 too.
I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense. Everything we've heard so far this offseason, I've just loved from Ben Johnson, and it sounds like exactly what you want to hear. And he seems so transparent. You don't love it if you've been drafting Luther Burden, where we're at right now with the health, but everything else just like seems like we're cooking here. I think it's going to be a huge year for Loveland.
I am scared. If you're in these one quarterback leagues, though, I do think Caleb is scary if you do miss out. And just when you look at, because we're expecting this transition, but you look at his open too, to open the year. He obviously has that early bye. They have the week 5 bye, but the opening schedule is really rough. I mean, they open with Minnesota. They get Detroit, who I think is the healthier defense, is still going to be really good defense. Then they've got, the Cowboys, who their secondary might not be as good, but they can rush the passer. And that's like, that's Caleb's answer. He has to answer the pass rush stuff. So even if you're in a one quarterback league and you want to take a flyer on Caleb, I mean, out of the first 5 weeks, you might only use him one time. Like, to me, like, I don't think that's worth the squeeze. I think he'll end up being on waivers earlier in years in these one quarterback leagues.
I love that note, because they had a slow start under Ben Johnson in Detroit when they first started implementing things. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And unless you're just totally enamored with somebody like I am with Loveland, that maybe you just wait and see how this all shakes out, and then go try to trade for somebody or pick somebody up after the first month of the season, because it could be a slow start.
And speaking of that slow start, if it is a slow start, I feel like there's a good chance we will be overdrafting almost all Bears. Just looking at where they're going in drafts, the expectation for me, at least, is that this offense is going to be humming from the start based on that. I'm not sure it will be. The one that scares me the most, because I do believe in his talent, but I don't really believe in his fit in this offense, is Rome Odunze. And I'm just interested to see how that works. If he is an isolated outside receiver, he's not necessarily going to win in the ways that Jameson Williams won for Ben Johnson. And he has to win in the ways that he won in college, I think, at least, but also around the line of scrimmage, he was better than people realize, but it was mostly outside contested catches. And that's just something that requires a lot of rapport with the quarterback. And I'm not so sure it's like a featured aspect of Johnson's offense. So that's one I'm keeping an eye on.
Caleb gives me concern as it pertains to Rome, but my favorite thing about Ben Johnson is how adaptable he seems to be, and all the players that have been with him say that like he really is focused on them and what they bring. And Rome has said that too already. Listened to an interview that he had with Matt Harmon the other day, which is so cool. Love it for the fantasy nerds that we've got stuff like that going on. I'm coming around on Rome, but I do typically agree with where you're at in terms of his fantasy perceived value. I think it is a risky bet where he's going right now. All right, Liam Coen, I think, is a good transition here. Is the other new play caller that just like wonder kid, like gives us all green signals, but not exactly the best situation that he's stepping into here in Jacksonville. But he does have really, really awesome weapons. Like Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter together could just be, pretty unstoppable, honestly, for somebody who was so effective at designing these route concepts last year. Is there anything that gives you pause on him being in the same tier as Johnson other than just longevity?
I do think, like Dan kind of hinted at, just, all the players that were good with Liam Coen last year were also really good before Liam Coen as well. So it's that's what's tough, right? Like, how much weight do you give it? How much do we double count?
Well, he
I
completely changed the run game, unless you want to just give it all to Graham Barton and Bucky, which obviously those are huge factors, but they went from like worst to first basically in the run game.
Yeah, I mean,
The
it's
screen game was completely different too.
that's what you're gonna see is the quick hitting stuff, and that was Trevor Lawrence's main issue and has been his issue so far to start the career. Is he hasn't played in offenses that give him a lot of free squares. I mean, even before he got injured last year, I mean, he was second in depth of target behind Anthony Richardson. Like that shouldn't be Trevor Lawrence's game. And that's how we've seen Liam Coen kind of impact, Baker Mayfield. You said like not only the screens, we talked about the Bo Nix, right? Too. You're able to kind of mask some of the deficiencies maybe a quarterback has. He doesn't have to be a perfect quarterback, but you're able to just, turn a guy that had some traits. We're all like high round picks. Baker Mayfield was a number 1 pick overall, just like Trevor Lawrence. Like, it's not like he turned these guys like, he turned water into wine with these guys. He just kind of coaxed out like kind of the best of their traits. So are we going to see him get, Trevor Lawrence, those free squares, right? Like give him those looks, use the screen game. By all accounts, they're just like spamming Trevor Etienne, Travis Etienne, the screens right now in practice. We know Travis Hunter has that ability too when they use him. And then Brian Thomas Jr. took off when everyone kind of deteriorated around him. Everyone got hurt. And we've seen that slot usage kind of bump up and get some of that diverse usage that we said. So, yeah, that's what we're looking for at free stuff. They're going to throw the ball a ton. That's what I know. We're going to get a lot of volume out of this Jaguars passing game, I think.
Yeah. Do you have any stats on like that? I guess it's hard because it's just last year. Did they significantly increase the like pace of play or anything like that? I haven't dug into pace yet.
No, so far like the Coen stuff, but I think they're just going to be pressed differently than the Bucs, because the Bucs defense when it was healthy was still pretty solid.
Yeah.
This Jaguars defense on paper looks like we got to take some steps of faith, some significant steps of faith of like they're going to be mid-range or above average.
I got you.
For me on Coen, I think I'm okay putting him in this even with the small sample size, but I don't, as we move it forward to 2025 fantasy, it doesn't lock me into feeling great, because I think like when I look at this offense from the passing standpoint, I love what you just broke down, Rich, and you brought it up earlier, Jacob. In addition to the screens, which are going to help, and the free squares, which are going to help Trevor Lawrence, just having a player like Hunter on the field, if he does end up starting at receiver, is going to be awesome for what you went over even before with Brian Thomas, how we're going to get him more of those quick in-breaking routes that Mike Evans had. That's going to work for Hunter too. Like you watch his tape at Colorado, I thought he was by far and away the best receiver I watched on tape in this class. I thought it was a clear-cut difference. And part of that was the release package off the line of scrimmage and that ability to win in breaking routes very early for Shedeur Sanders. So that's something that he's going to be able to showcase for Lawrence. I even like some of the additions, like De'Ami Brown. I think no one talks about him. I think he's going to play. I think he was signed for a reason, and Cohen's going to use him in a good way as well. It's just real run game for me is where I get all caught up and stopped up, because while I do want to credit, and I do credit Liam Coen for the run game, Bucky Irving, Graham Barton is one of the best movers at center, and Tristan Wirfs is one of the best movers at tackle. There's just none of that on the offense, unless you want to give that to Etienne, I guess, or Bigsby, maybe Tootin. But like, there's none of that on the offensive line for the Jaguars. And if that run game doesn't operate the same way the run game operated for the Bucs, is the pass game going to be as efficient? Because that's where we started the show with the top tier callers. It's the guys who marry the run game and the pass game. But the only way to do that, we've seen this with McVay, by the way. Like, I feel like McVay went through that one period where people were like starting to question him a little bit. And then the Rams added the right pieces on the offensive line. They went to more power gap man scheme, and they started to get the run game working. And now since then, it's like, oh, look at what we have here again. The McVay pass game. It's elite again. So to me, it kind of all does start there. And so that's just my biggest concern with him, with Coen. It's like, if that run game is not operating the same way on the offensive line, is he still as elite as a play caller to generate yards in the run game?
Absolutely.
Yeah, these tackles look real rough on paper. Yeah. I mean, Anton Harrison has been really, he's been like Evan Neal rough the first 2
Walker
years.
Little is not much better.
Yeah, it's real rough. And then, they do sign Patrick McCarry from the Ravens, but Robert Hainsey, who comes with Coen he was basically a reserve for the Buccaneers. He hardly played for them. They bring those guys over, but yeah, I mean, Hainsey was a guy who lost his job, actually. So it's very interesting to see how it's all going to fit together. I'm with you, though. Like, it's one of these things. I think this is going to be more of a work in progress than I think necessarily maybe the Ben Johnson situation will be.
Do we want to bump him down? Do we want to separate and keep this as our only A? I feel like he belongs there. The run game at Kentucky with him and Ray Davis was really good too. He comes from the McVay tree, and his ability to boost last year's run game with the motion. Bucky Irving was a full yard. His average was a full yard higher per rush with motion compared to non.
I'm willing to put him there simply because of the fact that he made Will Levis look competent at any level.
I love that. Yeah, I mean it was so good last year. Obviously, this number is boosted by the fact that Baker Mayfield had 41 touchdowns, but that is also that's a factor. That's a result of Liam being so good. They were so good in the red zone. They defenses, they just had answers. The defense, it's typically like you get more compressed in the red zone and it like slows some people down. It didn't slow them down at all. The Lions were the only team that had more fantasy points. If you look at like fantasy points per target, the year before Coen got there, the Bucs were right at league average. Last year, they were third, behind only the Ravens and the Lions. And then if you look at like yards per target, yards per route run, they're like in the top 10, whereas before with Dave Canales, they were just league average. So if you want to take out the touchdowns that affect the fantasy points per target number, I'm really optimistic. I think everything checks out. I don't know if the results will match this tier, but everything that he's shown us, I think he belongs in.
And he's and I'm curious to see how much that actually rolls over the stuff we talked about, the free square stuff, because the one thing he's talked about the entire offseason is just explosive plays. I mean, the Jaguars scored 5 touchdowns. They were a team that had 5 touchdowns outside the red zone last year, and they had Diami Brown, they had Bashal too, and they had Travis Hunter. Like, these are all guys that can generate explosives.
I just put Kevin O'Connell up here, and I'm like, I feel like I've got to move these two down. I let's say that they get a B tier all by themselves, and it's like we think they belong
because they're taking the test this year, right?
Yeah, they're going to be head coaches this year, which is different. They don't get to focus everything they have on the offensive designing and play calling. I'm moving them down. Okay, KOC I think is A tier, and Matt LaFleur I think is A tier. Are we fine with both of those? Do you have any? I would love to hear your LaFleur thoughts, because I feel like people are so negative about the Packers right now, especially the receivers, like basically anybody but Josh Jacobs. And I feel like it could be way, way better this year. I think it might be one of the best sources of value in fantasy right now.
I am tempted to put both those guys in S tier because of what they've done with other quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact when Jordan Love got hurt last year, dude, Malik Willis, like the way he coached those games around Malik Willis. Because again, we talked about this earlier, is like, Ben Johnson's not going to turn Caleb Williams into Jared Goff. Like, that's not what coordinators do. They don't turn other players into players they had in previous iterations of their scheme. They try to maximize what that player does best. And I mean, Malik Willis looked he looked like he didn't even belong in the NFL in Tennessee. And he was competent, played with confidence, even throwing the football in those games that Malik Willis played last year. And then KOC, not only did you get the best season out of Sam Darnold, and then it was undone by what Sam Darnold does worst. You go back to Nick Mullins the year before that, and Josh Dobbs. I mean, I just think these guys get it. Like, I have utmost confidence in both of these guys.
I think that's an excellent take. Just looking at what they do with lesser talents at quarterback, it's really clear and evident based. And then you even went over it earlier, or we went over it earlier when we were talking about Mike McDaniel. Like, no offense to him, but he just wasn't able to reach that same level with that slight, and his downgrade was obviously bigger at quarterback. They didn't have many options behind Tua, but it's a good point to kind of showcase that.
And that's not McCarthy's game. And granted, we have no NFL sample size. We have 19 preseason dropbacks, but the negative play stuff was what he insulated, Michigan from, and that was still Sam Darnold's it was the undoing for the Vikings last year. He was 32nd in turnover worthy throw rate. Sam Darnold was, and he was 28th in sack rate. Like, if those things get cleaned up, JJ McCarthy doesn't have to replicate what Sam Darnold did from an efficiency stance, like a YPA or touchdown rate stuff. The negative play stuff, they've got to keep the Vikings out of the negative play stuff.
Reebs, do you have any thoughts on the Packers for fantasy?
Not really, because it's just even with them throwing the ball more than the raw splits will show with Jordan, because the pre-groin injury is what kind of sabotaged the drop back stuff. We didn't, after the groin injury, they just didn't throw the ball at all. But the problem is this is still a team under this scheme. They're not going to play a ridiculous amount of 11 personnel. They're going to rotate their receivers based on role. And it's just really hard to glom on to like a team that's probably be in the back half of the league in pass volume and have role players and expect them to be like fantasy juggernauts.
I kind of wonder if Dontavian Wicks doesn't play as much this year. And they do kind of have 3 guys. They have Dobbs, they have Golden, and they have Reed.
I mean, I brought this up. Jaden Reed through 2 years has run 7 pass routes on 1 to 2 wide receiver sets. 7 total pass routes.
It's the biggest issue I have because I watch Reed's tape and I love Reed and I want
He's
to
so
buy
good.
fantasy because I think he's just
Josh Downs, dude. I am obsessed with Josh Downs. I'm obsessed with Josh Downs as a player. But the dude has no path to play in 2 wide receiver sets.
Right.
His 2 years in the NFL, 16 pass routes on 1 to 2 wide receiver sets. Over the course of a season, that's like 100 route difference versus players. Like, you know what I mean? You lose like 100 pass routes.
Volume is so everything in fantasy. It's the problem I have as well with just kind of wanting to go all in on either of those 2 players. Now, I think
in best ball, I'm smashing these dudes in best ball because I brought this up on a few shows. If you caught me, like I'm repeating a take that I've said in a few shows, is a lot of people think best ball makes like the Alec Pierces better. And like true, it does, but it makes also the slot dependent receivers and the receiving running backs better too, because those guys inherently run into weeks because they're efficient players.
Right.
But you're gonna have to play the dance with these guys in weekly managed leagues where you're like, oh, I just had a 3-game sample where Jaden Reed had 6 targets. My wide receiver 4 is a great matchup. I'm gonna pull Jaden Reed out of my lineup, and it's Jaden Reed houses, one of these post plays or slant, and you're gonna just be frustrated. You're gonna be driving yourself crazy.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And I feel like you're right about that. Those are not the players you want to ever really roster in fantasy. Those are the ones that give you headaches for season-long managed leagues, obviously. Though I do think you have a better chance of getting it out of downs, getting more routes out of downs, because I think the Colts defense is terrible and it's going to lead to more kind of catch up than the Packers, who have a solid defense and a solid run game. So to answer your question, Jacob, I am a little concerned over investing with the Packers, despite believing that they're going to throw more and that with Love healthy, because I do kind of credit it all as well as Rich did to just that injury and the post and pre. The one question I have, though, is because you didn't mention him, but we don't have to get into this. This is for another show. I think Savion Williams is going to play a bigger role than people think right away. And I've seen some good reports on him early in camp. So that's the thing. Like if we've seen throughout LaFleur's tenure that, and everybody talked it up like, oh, LaFleur will never have a 1-back system. It's always multiple backs. And then last year it was like a 1-back system basically. But like the receivers, I don't know if he'll ever really have set roles, as Rich kind of alluded to. So that's what really scares me about getting in on any of the guys.
Yeah, because Romeo Doubs is great in the run game. He's great in the red zone. And Romeo Doubs doesn't have great standalone value for himself, but you know what he is? He's a thorn in our ass for everyone else's fantasy value.
All right, I'm moving LaFleur down then for fantasy purposes, because if we really
do we kind of just recalibrate like everyone down? I saw someone say like we have too many S tiers, but granted, we're not doing every coordinator in the NFL.
No, those all belong. You made your case really strong, I thought, for the coordinators who did it without quarterbacks.
Yeah, are you fine with moving LaFleur down for?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, LaFleur would be better real life than fantasy.
If we feel like Josh Jacobs is the only guy, then like
that's fair. That's fair.
That's where we're at. I think we're probably just going to go long today, which everybody is, from what I know, fine with. Let me know if not. So I wanted to bring up just a little sidetrack here as it pertains to like the 2 tight end stuff, because the use of 2 and 3 tight ends is higher than it's ever been, or higher than it's been in a very long time. I don't have like 1960 data to confirm that that's right. But we are moving into this kind of bigger bully ball world a little bit and creating more problems for defenses with this type of personnel. And I wanted to point out some of the teams that are doing it the most, because I think it's relevant for a number of reasons. So you've got the Jaden Reeds and the Josh Downs, where it affects them in a way that we don't like for fantasy. But on the flip side, you have receivers or just route runners in general, who benefit from having more tight ends on the field, because, the Vikings having some of these tight ends that never catch passes out there, that as a route runner compared to Josh Downs being out there as a route runner is so drastically different in terms of how it affects the likelihood of the perimeter wide receivers drawing a target. And that's borne out in the data. If you look at formations that have 2, 3, 4 receivers, the more receivers that are out there, the lower the target rates are, the lower the yard per route run rates are, and all of that. So no team ran 2+ tight ends more than the Ravens last year. 45% of their plays, they had 2 tight ends on the field. That was just 2 tight ends. Sorry. No team ran 2+ tight ends more than the Saints. 50% of their plays. They ran a lot of plays with 3 tight ends on the field. And so I think that is interesting as we look to the Seahawks and Clint Kubiak, who we're going to talk about in a moment here. The Chiefs did it a lot last year. I think that's going to shift back, if I had to guess, with wide receiver health. The Cardinals do it a lot. They were 3rd with 48% of the plays having 2 or more tight ends on the field. which again, I think Marvin Harrison's numbers could be better than we're expecting this year. And then a team that I wanted to bring up was the Raiders. I think Chip Kelly is somebody who might do this a lot. And I really want to get Reeb's thoughts on Chip Kelly because I don't know if we can reasonably put him in this discussion and rank him. But
the highest paid offensive coordinator, man.
I think we're going to see a lot of motion from Chip Kelly, specifically for Brock Bowers.
So excited about Chip Kelly, by the way, in the NFL, guys. I just like watching Ohio State tape with the two backs. I was like, this is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and we've got just two really, really unique weapons in Ashton Jeanty and Bowers to threaten defenses with. And then Mayer is a good blocker. Both Bowers and Michael Mayer can block and run routes and threaten defenses a different way. So it's like they kind of have some of the personnel matchup problems that some of these other offenses that are so good are presenting, like Todd Monken and the Ravens. And Geno could really elevate all of this, I think. And so I wanted to get any thoughts you have, Reebs, on Chip Kelly. Obviously, the for fantasy, the biggest note is that the Chip Kelly offenses have produced just an insane amount of plays. They play so fast, like faster than anybody, really. Do you have anything on Chip Kelly?
Well, yeah. Before any of that, just piggyback on something you brought about the two tight ends going up. We've started to see this actually be a problem for tight ends for fantasy football, like it was with wide receivers. Remember when we started to have the 11 personnel boom? And then when wide receiver ones were starting to get less production for fantasy because there were more wide receivers on the field earning targets and then kind of chipping away at the top end production. Now, as the game is kind of condensed and formations have condensed, we've seen teams now utilize their wide receiver one with nuance. It's, look at the last 7 wide receiver ones in fantasy football. 5 of them are over 20% slot rate. Another 4 of them over 30%. Like literally, this is the whole arc of Jamar Chase's career, right? Like Jamar Chase enters the NFL as a vertical threat and just consistently becomes a more nuanced receiver because the Bengals want to get their best player of the football, right? We've seen a lot that shift, that archetype, AJ Green, Julio Jones, like that's not what is winning in fantasy football. That happened a little bit to Marvin Harrison Jr., like you let a little bit off, but in tight ends, we're starting to see that happen again with this influx of more tight ends on the field. It started to chip away from the top end tight end scores. I mean, you look at tight end one scorers, they had their 4th lowest target rate of the past 15 years. And it's really started to turn some of these guys that we talk about, the slot dependent wide receivers for fantasy football. We have that archetype for tight ends, and it's been really impacted by these guys that can run block. We saw this with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox last year. I think it's going to happen in a couple other spots this year. Evan Ingram with Adam Troutman. Like these are still teams that are going to use multiple tight ends. I think we're going to see the Vikings play a lot more multiple tight ends this year, especially while Jordan Addison is suspended. If he's suspended to start the year, they did invested into Josh Oliver. These guys don't get run plays when they're on the field. TJ Hawkinson is under 30% run rate when he's on the field. Dawson Knox, 45% compared to 36% for Dalton Kincaid. Evan Ingram, the highest rate a team has run the football with Evan Ingram on the field is 36% of the time of his snaps. So if we're moving into this like more bully ball era and it's more advantageous for offenses to utilize these run blocking tight ends. We saw this with Charlie Warner at the end of last year with Zach Robinson as well, where Kyle Pitts' snaps just fell off a cliff because he couldn't run block. These guys that can't run block and can't play multiple are kind of guys you want to be a little more hesitant to invest in. Whereas we used to kind of want those guys. We used to want like the slot tight end, right? The power slot tight end. And now we want guys like Trey McBride. We want guys like George Kittle. We want guys who don't come off the football field.
Colson Loveland.
Yeah, those are the guys I think you want to focus on from an archetype stance now for fantasy football.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the Bears number is going to shoot way up. I think the Bears and the Raiders and maybe like the Titans are a weird one. And I think those teams might use a lot more 2 tight end sets this year. The teams that don't use it very often, so you've got 3 receivers on the field most of the time, are the Falcons at 11%, the 49ers at 14%, the Rams at 16% last year. The Chargers are also low, but I wonder if that maybe changes. They brought in a lot of different tight ends this year. They
had a lot of injuries at tight end last year too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, 20% for them. The league average was 30%. Did you have any thoughts on Chip Kelly?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Oh, sorry. I went on that long-winded rant for Chip Kelly. I do think we're going to get back to tempo Chip Kelly, though. He didn't run a lot of tempo at Ohio State because they just didn't have to, right? So I do think that the Raiders are still a team while in transition. We expect the Raiders to be a better real-life football team and a more competitive football team. Like, they're still easily the 4th worst team in that division. Like they're going to be pressed still. So I do think we'll get some of that tempo back, because at UCLA, he still was running a lot of tempo. It was just last year at Ohio State, he was slow. I do think we'll get some of that back. And then don't forget they added Jack Bech too, who is like a very active player in the run game. When he started at LSU, and everyone loves to talk about how he out-targeted Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas as a freshman. But that's because he was playing like this hybrid, like not like he wasn't really playing like he was playing like that tight end, like the Gesicki role. And that's why he was on the field so much. But that's why I think they want him too, because he fits into this like he's an active player in the run game. And, Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll want guys who are going to get active in the run game.
I am curious how much implied point totals affect your projections, Reebs. Where do you have the Raiders compared to their point total? Because the only offenses the betting markets have below them are the Titans, Jets, Giants, Saints, and Browns. And so that's where I'm having such a tough time with this, is we've got 2 guys getting picked in the top 15 or so of fantasy drafts.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited for this offense overall. I'm a huge believer in Geno. I think the coaching could be good. Where did they shake out for you, and how much do implied point totals affect your rankings?
Well, the both of the top guys that are being drafted, Bowers and Janty, still stand out because of just the opportunity they share within their offense. So really, Jacoby Myers is the third wheel of like a player that's like at the NFL level earned opportunities. The rest of the guys still take a lot of guesswork. Deontay Thornton takes a lot of guesswork. Especially coming from Josh Hubel's system. Like that's just not even a real off. Like any like Tennessee guys you just can't take seriously coming to the NFL, because they play an offense that's utilized to to exploit college football's rules. Like, and it's why these guys aren't asked that they struggle coming to the NFL. Dan lived this with Jalen Hyatt. The last 2 years,
Still living it with Jalen Hyatt.
Like it's the same thing we did with Jalen Wright last year. We just don't have these answers. We're going to do it with Dylan Sampson. It's just like, it's going to be interesting too. And we have the conversation come up with RJ Harvey too, of like how, like, coming from Gus Malzahn's system, but when the Raiders throw the football, it's going to be Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, and the Raiders run the football, it's going to be Ashton Janty. So if they're going to run like a significant number of plays, like these guys are still, from a volume stance, going to be guys you want to invest in.
Yeah. I think and I know you're with me on this, Jacob. I think we're probably going to end up a lot higher on this Raiders offense than Vegas is. I mean, you just went over the teams listed. I feel confident with all those teams you mentioned being there, but I feel a lot more confident in the Raiders offense than the Seahawks offense. I feel a lot more confident in the Raiders offense than, let's see, the Panthers offense. There's the Saints. I don't know if you Saints were mentioned there. I certainly would put them down there.
The Seahawks are 12th in projected points this year, behind the Packers. That's one that we have to reconcile this somehow, because I kind of agree. I feel a little bit more bullish about the Raiders and like the potential there, and there's a lot of reasons to be worried about the Seahawks, but are we just so bold as to be like Vegas is wrong?
I mean, we know they're inherently going to be wrong. So if they're not, they're setting markets based on, kind of median stuff. You try to find those outliers. It's the same thing where you can't draft fantasy football based on Vegas lines. It's the same. You see this, it's like you can't create ADP based on, someone's yardage total.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good way to do it. It's just interesting to me as we move through it. I may be too low on Seattle. I do like Kubiak there. I just am not a Sam Darnold believer outside of Kevin O'Connell at all. And mostly that offensive line, I look at it and I'm like, did they really do enough to fix it this offseason? Doesn't really look like it to me. And I'm curious to see. But, people have brought up a good point when it comes to that. Kubiak was working with a bad offensive line with New Orleans last year. Still was able to do some things before Carr, when Carr was playing.
Everyone died in New Orleans last year. And granted, we were never going to have the 40-point weeks that we started out with. There was always going to be some pullback on that. I was really excited to count my best ball winnings through 2 weeks. Unfortunately, no league pays out in week 3. But remember, everyone died. Caesar Ruiz goes down. Eric McCoy goes down. Then Rashid Shaheed goes down. Chris Olave goes down. It was just a disaster. It was just Derek Carr goes down. People forget, with Derek Carr, they were 0-7 without Derek Carr. And no matter what you think about Derek Carr, he's at least a functional quarterback.
He's always been much better than people realize. I think last year is the actual proof. When you have to actually go to Rattler and Hainer, you're like, oh, now we can't function at all.
Yeah, so I mean, it's tough to say the complete. It's tough for me to just drag Kubiak because of what happened to New Orleans from an efficiency stance last year, just because everyone got hurt.
Totally fair.
let's finish up our rankings here. I want to get any thoughts you have on Todd Monken and what he does to boost fantasy beyond just the players. Because if you look at just the stats from last year, and then obviously the fact like Baltimore, the only team that's implied for more points this year is the Bills. It's easy to just like say he belongs higher on this list. He's elevated what they were doing. He's unlocked better deep and intermediate passing from Lamar Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the play designs. Like if you look at average separation score, the Ravens receivers are at the very tippy top. So are the tight ends. Did you have anything on Monken specifically? Because it is kind of hard to know just how much to attribute to him compared to just like this overwhelming problem that the player personnel presents. Anything you've got on Monken?
Yeah, I mean, I still think that, from a play calling stance, he does the things that we're looking for in terms of, a pass rate over expectation. Because even the Ravens, the Ravens would have more volume. They're not going to be top 10 in the league in volume ever in terms of passing volume, because it's just, stylistically, it's the same thing with like the Eagles. We expect more passing, but like they're not going to go from top 10. But it's the pass rate over expectation stuff that we've seen when the Ravens just aren't in very many neutral scripts ever, like these past 2 years. We'd see a lot more dropbacks. It's just they've absolutely just mollywop teams. So we would see them drop back to pass more. But Lamar, what you've seen him do with Lamar last year, it's again the under center stuff, right? It's the offensive leverage, getting Derrick Henry involved. I mean, Lamar's career high before last year, his under center dropback rate was 16.6%. Last year it was 29.1%. He almost doubled it.
That's a great stat.
He almost doubled it. And you look at all of his efficiency, under center was just through the roof. And it's because you put teams in a box, right? Especially when you're talking about being able to incorporate the play action. Last year, pass plays under center had an 85% play action rate in the NFL. 85% of the pass plays under center. And we know that's what the stuff we want. And that's what Monken's been able to unlock here. I mean, these 2 seasons Lamar has had under Monken have been absolute demon stuff. Like he had one of the arguably the best quarterback season a quarterbacks had last year.
Yeah.
And and that's not me to stir up like an MVP debate, because that's different criteria, right? Every people has their own voting on how they choose MVP. I'm not trying to drag that up that he should have been MVP, but man, he had literally on paper one of the best football seasons we've ever seen a quarterback have in NFL history last year.
Dan and I did a whole quarterback breakdown for like how they played and how we project them to play, not for fantasy but for real life, and we're both like so enamored with Joe Burrow and what he put on film last year, and analytically too. If you look at the accuracy charting for fantasy points data, Burrow is just like impeccable. And still we're like, we've got to give it to Lamar. What Lamar did last year was so freaking insane. But
those
honestly, we
were so much better. We ended up putting Mahomes and Allen.
Yeah, I was gonna say we took the coward's way out.
Coward's way out because of it factor and things like that. Who's actually won, and we don't want to deal with listening to some things probably in our minds, at least subconsciously. But as far as what you said, Rich, I really thought it was interesting because it was by far and away the best season Lamar's had as a passer, and it's probably a sign of things to come, just given his trajectory.
And it's not like they added anything significant to the passing game. Obviously, Derrick Henry changes the way that defenses play them. They saw like way more stack boxes than they had in the past. But like, if anything, the passing weapons got worse because Andrews was worse than he has been, and that's been the number one option for the passing offense.
Yeah, and the only thing with the Ravens is like you just have to anticipate like some type of regression, right? Like.
Red zone especially.
I mean, they had the massive 75% touchdown conversion rate. Lamar, 60% of his passes into the end zone were touchdowns last year. Like just an absolute like bonkers number. His previous career high was 38. League rate was 38% of those throws. His previous high was low 40s. Mark Andrews caught 9 of 10 end zone targets. Like,
yep.
Like what the hell is that?
I have no idea how to play Mark Andrews. A big part of me wants to buy in on him this year, just because like there's such an easy path. Just given how bad tight end position is in fantasy football, there is such an easy path to him being an every week starter. It's like, you plop him in the lineup, you're going to get like 10 to 12 touchdowns over a 17 game season probably, and it's like that's enough to win in the NFL. I do want to bring up one point before we move on. I love the stat you just brought up, and this is not going to help us for fantasy, but it's so interesting to me. 85% of drop back of snaps under center for the quarterback that ended up being a pass play or play action, because like I recently did a rewatch of the 2007 Giants Cowboys playoff game for my other show. And it was like so funny watching how different football was. There were Romo and Eli were just dropping back from under center and throwing a pass. You just don't see that anymore. I wonder if that's something that at any point coordinators are going to be like, as we talk about how the NFL keeps shifting, like,
it did go up last year. That's why I brought up. I actually have a free article on the site if anyone wants to go check it out that has like all this information in it. Because the one thing playing with what like I said, I keep referring to as offensive leverage, because you're dictating to the defense how they have to play, as vice versa. Because, when you're just in shotgun, the defense knows how you have to pass. And some of this has been the influence of some of my OG like data, like doing the Konami code stuff, right? The influx of the mobile quarterback from college has impacted all of this, right? Like the athletic quarterback. But you get to use more motion to under center. You just have so much more, again, offensive leverage, being able to operate under center. And I think that's why we've seen it kind of bounce back as the way to combat, what defenses, what this Fangio stuff has done. Because it's not like you said, like the cover 2 stuff, which always gets highlighted, like rate of cover 2 isn't necessarily going up. It's, you said, the pattern match. It's the cover 4, the cover 6 stuff is what's going up.
Let's talk about Kellen Moore. We've been like kind of, on the periphery of a Kellen Moore discussion here, with a lot of the rushing quarterbacks and how they help and everything. We saw him and Philadelphia completely elevate things from 2023. And of course, Saquon Barkley was a huge part of that. But Jalen Hurts continues to progress, and that's part of it as well. But I do think a lot of the credit does belong to Kellen Moore, who we've been optimistic about at several stops before Philly. And then he really put together like kind of his magnum opus last year. He's got a chance with the Saints here. Really interested to see how it's going to go. He plays super fast. So the Eagles were third. They were just 4 plays behind the Lions for the most total plays created last year. Even though they're super run heavy, they were still creating that amount of plays. And typically like more pass heavy play calling is, more associated with being able to create more total offensive volume. Do you have anything on Kellen Moore, Reebs? Where do you think he belongs in this discussion?
I mean, yeah, just everything he did last year to make, the best version of, Jalen Hurts for all those cheat codes we've, kind of emphasized, the year before the Eagles were 28th in pre-snap motion. They go up to 50.8% last year. It was 28% the year before that, with the use of pre-snap motion. I mean, Hurts was second in the NFL in quarterback rating. It was 10th in completion rate, second in yards per pass attempt. They played with a lot more tempo. All those things just kind of unlocked it. Again, if they would have been pushed more on the scoreboard, we would have seen more of a run out, especially like when you look at like the second half stuff with Jalen Hurts. Because in the first half of games, Jalen Hurts was 14th in dropbacks per game. And then he was 32nd in second half dropbacks because they weren't challenged on the scoreboard. And that's where Saquon just started nuking teams in the second half. You wear these teams down and then these 80-yard touchdowns happen. But I'm excited about, what he's going to bring stylistically, schematically to the Saints. It's just the quarterback stuff, right? Like it's just so hard to expect, what you can coax out of Tyler Shuck. Like it's just, I think this is going to be a year in progress. I think we have to give him a year to kind of get the pieces that this offense kind of wants to have. Maybe Tyler Shuck surprises. I do think this team's going to have a ton of dropbacks and a ton of pass game opportunity. So like guys like Olave and Alvin Kamara in these full PPR leagues, I think are undervalued. Especially Olave, especially these DraftKings best ball drafts. Like Olave is going like wide receiver 36. It's absolutely insane to me. Like Olave is probably going to have his highest target count of his career. And now people be like, oh, concussions. We can't predict that stuff. We did it with Devontae Adams to start his career. And like, you don't know, we can't predict like the next hit. It's the next hit for any of these guys. They're playing professional football. But I do think Olave, while he's able to be on the field, is going to have his highest target count. He's going to get the most first read stuff he's had of his career. He's going to play a lot more in the slot than he has in his career. And people forget Chris Olave is a really good football player, over 2 yards per out run every year of his career to open his career. So I see him as a value. What you worry about from a fantasy stance, the weekly stuff, is just the touchdown count. Like, is Olave a guy like Michael Pittman a couple years ago? Remember Michael Pittman, where he's just stacking receptions and stacking targets, but you didn't get any touchdowns and you had really no like ceiling equity. He was just kind of a glue guy in your lineup. But in these best ball leagues, I think he's a really good value.
I'm glad that you brought up the role for Olave, because I think people are just like overlooking him because of the concussions and then not being excited for the Saints, which, to be fair, the Saints are very low in projected points. But this is why I think Moore belongs in this B tier. Is he's created some of the most like fantasy friendly roles that we've seen at the wide receiver position. When CeeDee Lamb had his first breakout, it was through him. He totally revitalized Keenan Allen for us for fantasy. And if you look at those two specific seasons, they were the highest scoring seasons we've seen in terms of fantasy scoring on pre-snap motion looks, in terms of like this player actually being the one who's used the motion and then that yielding fantasy points. And then last year we saw more of that than we had seen previously for Devontae Smith
yep.
and AJ Brown. Devontae Smith was third in the league in the percentage of his targets where he was open on the target, behind only the Ravens guys, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. And I think that, of course, has a lot to do with Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley and the problem they present to defenses, but also does speak to the designs and the passing concepts he was drawing up.
You guys both made a compelling case when it comes to Kellen Moore. I am not nearly as high on him as you guys are. He would be a tier or two lower for me. I feel a little bit fake Sharpie with Kellen Moore. I didn't like his time in LA with the Chargers. And I feel like you talked about it earlier, Jacob, like how much of Monken, and I think it's less for Monken because I really do watch the tape and enjoy what he does conceptually from a schematic standpoint, but how much of it is just the issue of you're facing the Eagles, they have Hurts, they have Barkley, and they have an even better offensive line than literally any of the ones we talked about. Like when I watched Eagles tape, a lot of the time, it wasn't necessarily these diverse run schemes like we talked about with Liam Coen, great calls by Kellen Moore. It was just man beat. It was just your offensive line beating the opposing defensive line and Saquon Barkley being on the field. I just struggle to credit the coordinator, the play call for that. So for him, it's a struggle. But I want to talk about another coordinator as Jacob takes a break to go. I think use the bathroom. We'll find out when he gets back. But I want to talk about another coordinator who I know a lot of people are much higher on than I am. I think he's good for NFL winning, and I think he's good for what this team wants to do to try to have a physical brand and mindset and win football games. I don't think he's great for fantasy, though. It's Joe Brady of the Buffalo Bills. Rich, I need to get your take on Brady because I just watched so much Brian Daboll Bills offense, watching Josh Allen rip the football in the intermediate vertical areas of the field. And then I watched Joe Brady, and I'm like, is this really the best I can get from Dalton Kincaid, a guy I loved on tape at Utah? Is this the max I can get from Kincaid? Are we really maximizing our players here? Josh Allen, Kincaid, and others. And that's my struggle with Brady. While I do think it maximizes James Cook, his system, and whoever plays running back, Ray Davis, and maybe it's best for the Bills, is it good for fantasy?
No, because I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to continue to see like that rotation. Well, no team saw more man coverage last year than the Bills. And I think they tried to answer that by getting a guy like Josh Palmer on and the cheap, because remember, this is Josh Allen's money zone. Like we're now paying Josh Allen. Like we're finally now, and it's starting because you've seen they've lost some veterans this year because this is the first time that they started to feel that squeeze of the quarterback contract, and he only goes up these next few years. So they had to try to they tried to do this with Amari Cooper during the season last year when they had trouble with guys beating man coverage. And just it turned out Amari just didn't have much juice left. Josh Palmer's had really good man coverage metrics. I think they tried to do what the Ravens did with Rashad Bateman last year, like just get a guy that can create separation on the cheap, and hopefully that just fits into their wide receiver rotation. But I still think we're going to see these guys move around too much because they're a team that's going to win games. The Bills are too good. Like they're going to win games. So they're never going to be pressed to throw the ball 600 times. So you're not going to get the volume run out. This is the problem with Khalil Shakir, right? Like this is, again, falls in that same bucket we talked about Jaden Reed and Josh Downs. 29 pass routes and 1 to 2 wide receiver sets for Khalil Shakir, the last 2 years. You just don't get that run out. And you get a team that's going to be in bottom 10 in drop back rate. That's not fantasy friendly. So I do think they're going to just continue to rotate these guys. I don't really give Joe Brady a lot of what's gone on the last 2 years, like a bunch of credit, because Josh Allen, we've never seen a player, like especially in big games, just kind of take over like Josh Allen does. Like the Bills just put everything on Josh Allen in every big spot. Like it's all Josh Allen.
I really thank you, Dan, so much. That was much needed. I'm not built for these 2-hour podcasts. I had to take a quick break there for health reasons. I wanted to hear his Reebs thoughts on Brady, because I feel like, if you look at the point totals, like they're literally number 1 in projected points this year. And the offense has been good under Brady. The run game has been really good. What we got from James Cook last year was beyond what I ever could have expected. But it's, how much of it is just that Josh Allen is awesome, and that creates a lot of problems for defenses, and James Cook is also awesome. I don't actually think he does belong in this range. Did you have any thoughts on the Bills, Dan, before we move on to a few other guys to close out here?
I went over it at the beginning before I prepped Rich, but yeah, for me, both him and Moore would both be lower for me.
Okay, so the guys that I've got that I really want to make sure that we talk about, or at least consider, that are on the outside looking in, if you think that they just clearly don't belong, that we don't need to talk about them, but it's Clint Kubiak. We talked about Chip Kelly, Drew Petzing, Kliff Kingsbury, and then Zach Robinson. I wanted to first see if either of you had anybody else that I didn't mention that we haven't mentioned yet, like Brian Callahan or something like that. Is there anybody else that you're intrigued by that you think belongs on this, like maybe their next up discussion, this group of guys?
I don't think, not for fantasy. I still think Stefanski's a really sharp head coach. It's just because anytime they've gotten functional quarterback play these past 2 years, like they've still kind of showed like it still works.
For sure.
It's just, the bag he was saddled with, and then the bag he's currently saddled with going into this year. You just have such like an undesirable taste to like have any Browns players on your roster.
Stefanski and Zach Taylor, I think both just do belong in it. Obviously, they have that respect, and Zach Taylor has funneled so many targets to the running back position between him and Burrow. And I'm
less so in on Zach Taylor. I'm not a Zach Taylor.
I know, Dan. I know that you get frustrated with him. I will say that I'm coming around on him. But I do think Burrow, for as good as he is, as amazing he is, he does sort of put some limitations on what you could do as a play caller and play designer. He like really doesn't want motion and stuff like that. He's kind of
we saw this with Aaron Rodgers, like his whole career. Like Aaron Rodgers is like
quarterback in the way that he likes to diagnose things. But we've seen Taylor slightly increase his motion year over year. Jamar Chase's percentage of it, or his number of snaps that have come as a motion man, has doubled each of the past 3 years. It went from 50 to 100 this past year. And so, I mean, starting to get Jamar Chase moving before the snap, getting him into condensed formations and stuff like that, that's so freaking insanely unfair for a defender to have to worry about.
Clear. I agree with you more so on that line of thinking when it comes to Taylor. I'm more willing to be, okay, maybe
you hate the run game.
I hate the Bengals run game, and I have for a long time.
So I think you just got to give those guys their flowers. They're great. They've been doing it for a long time. Maybe you have some problems with them, and maybe they're not producing a lot of fantasy relevant players beyond just like superstar talents that are obviously going to be good. But I do want to bring them up. Okay, let's talk about Kliff Kingsbury, because the freaking Commanders were 5th in plays. So that's what we all knew going in with Kingsbury, that was this offense was going to play fast, and it did. It created a ton of plays, but also, and of course, Jaden helps all of this. Shane Daniels helps so much in scaring defenses, what they can do on 4th down, what he can do on any given play, their RPO threat. But they were 4th in running back rushing success rate. On running back runs, only the Falcons, Lions, and Ravens ranked higher than the Commanders, which they don't have the running back talent to be in that range. Neither did
those Cardinals teams.
They didn't really have the offensive line talent to belong in that range either. But they had a good run game, and like Rich alludes to, like that's been a pretty consistent thing for Kingsbury. And then he ranked 5th in the amount of total fantasy points produced, PPR points, behind only the Lions, the Bucks, the Bengals, and the Ravens. So where does he factor in? There are some metrics that are like basically as good as Liam Coen, and we've seen him do it for 1 year now, whereas Coen, we've only seen him do it for 1 year. But we also have what happened before that. And then there's also the unconventional way in which they're doing this. I think Coen's, the things that stick out about what Coen's doing seem sustainable and seem like real problems for the defenses to deal with. Whereas I feel like Washington kind of just snuck up on people a little bit, running some of the pony and all the different ways that they made things work last year. So do you have any thoughts on them, Reebs?
Yeah, they're very similar to like the Broncos for me, right? Like they took advantage of just the prestige layout, right? Like they ended up having the easiest passing schedule in the NFL last year. They were also an offense, like when tasked to punch up, we start to see some of the token Kliff Kingsbury flaws, because he's just not creative enough in the pass game. Just for some reason, he doesn't know that his lead wide receiver is allowed to play other positions.
No, he's not.
This has happened with DeAndre
He has
Hopkins.
to be on the left. That's it.
Yes, dude, it absolutely kills me. Terry McLaurin, 681 snaps at left wide receiver, 95 at right wide receiver, 154 in the slot. Like anytime,
that's his position. That's where he plays.
It drives me absolutely insane. Where we talk about these other guys creatively knowing, like, hey, we got to get the ball to our best player. Because Terry McLaurin on like a a target per route basis, like even when you remove the dropbacks that had Jaden Daniels scramble sacks and throwaways, like, I mean, like it's not high enough to be like amongst the league leaders, and it's just like that just drives me crazy. So I just think Jaden Daniels covered up. Jaden Daniels made a lot happen, and then the schedule made a lot happen for them.
So are you worried about them regressing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As a team, yeah, absolutely.
They're tied with the Lions. They're just after the Chiefs, Rams, 49ers, Ravens, and Bills in terms of projected points this year. But I do think they're probably one of the prime regression candidates. How about you, Dan? How have you come around on Kliff Kingsbury? Where are we at heading into 2025?
Yeah, well, I obviously owe an apology to Kliff Kingsbury because I wasn't high on him prior to his stint with Washington. But I will say this, it's still hard for me to come around on him because of Jaden Daniels. And I think Rich said it, and I agree with Rich on it. When you have Jaden Daniels back there, it alleviates a lot of the pressure. I mean, I went into last year looking at their offensive line on paper being like, this cannot work. Doesn't matter how good Daniels is. And he kind of proved it can work because you can't really pressure Daniels the way you can pressure some of these other quarterbacks. So he makes you pay every time, either with his legs or just by, in my mind, at least navigating the pocket a lot better than he did at LSU. At LSU was a lot of pressure on, head down, we're going to run. Last year, I felt like he was cool, calm, and collected somehow. Maybe I got to credit Kingsbury for that, but that's all development stuff. We're talking about play calling here, and we're talking about fantasy football. And this is one of my prime teams that I think can regress this year in fantasy football for a lot of the reasons Rich broke down. So I want to come around on Kingsbury. I'm trying my hardest to. There are things I like about him, I guess, and there are things I like about the offense. I think he can use Deebo Samuel better than I'm higher on Samuel than all the fantasy community. I know that much, but overall, I think,
I mean, this is the one spot Deebo Samuel could have left the 49ers, and you still kind of feel all right about like how he's, because where his strengths lie. Jaden Daniels last year had 3 passing touchdowns that were run in by a pass catcher. The only quarterbacks that qualified for rating with lower were Cooper Rush and Trevor Lawrence, and they each had 1, and they didn't play. They played half the year. They literally 3 passing touchdowns were run into the end zone by a Commanders pass catcher. That's why they got Deebo Samuel.
That's a wild stat. Yeah.
He did a little bit. Yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
He did boost McLaurin's target share in a significant way. We brought this up on the last show that without the RPO usage, McLaurin's target per route run rate was actually lower than it had been in the previous seasons. So nothing he was doing on his own, or at least the way that the offense was designed outside of like clear intentional ways in getting him the ball, just a straight drop back game was not producing targets at a higher rate for McLaurin. It was just these like kind of handhold plays where it's just like, here's your one read, make the read, and then if he's there, find him. That resulted in more looks for him overall. But just thinking about it for fantasy purposes, I don't think we can put him as high as these other guys, but I think he's nearing that range because he does play so fast and because he gave us some good seasons outside of just Jaden. Like we got a legitimately useful season from Zach Ertz. And so if Deebo is potentially useful too, then like we might have multiple 3, even 4 players outside of the quarterback that are useful for fantasy, even if none of them are superstars.
Yeah, I'm fine like having him in like context of like the Kellen Moores of the world, like guys like where we still don't have the full answer on, but like we have some optimism for at least fantasy football for the main pieces. But do they like elevate like the ancillary guys and things like that? That's what's tough, right? Like we talked about that because to me, that's where the scheme comes in. Like 3 passing touchdowns, and granted they didn't have a lot of guys that were yak producers, but like they still have guys like Austin Eckler and Terry McLaurin. Whereas like think of this, so Jaden Daniels had 3 passing touchdowns last year that were run in by a pass catcher. Jared Goff, who we talked about the Ben Johnson stuff, had 23. Like, you know, that stuff. Let's actually look at the guys who are at the top and just see if this is a play caller stat. Maybe Jared Goff 23, then it was Joe Burrow 18, Baker Mayfield 16, Lamar Jackson 14, Sam Darnold 14. So we had Jordan Love on there at 13. Like so, Bo Nix is hanging around there at 11. Like they're putting their position. They're putting their players in a position to also get the ball into the end zone. We're just not thrown into the end zone target.
All right, the next guy I want to talk about here is, I think, a good segue because it's Kliff Kingsbury's former team. It's another offensive designer who really engineered a low-key, like, great run game last year and did the same thing the year before, and that was Drew Petzing with the Arizona Cardinals, and did so with not great offensive line talent either. If you Man, if you watch the Trey Benson cut up that I put on Twitter, it is rough. Some of the plays where it's just like running into a crowd of dust and nothing happening. But overall, the Cardinals ranked 12th in PPR points created as a team and were one of the most effective run games. They were not finding it here. I think they were first in. No, that's the Falcons. Sorry. Talk about Drew Petzing for me. We've got the use of more tight ends. Talk about Drew Petzing for me here while I try to make sense of all these tabs I've got open here.
I'll let Dan drop it because I kind of gave it like my take earlier when we talked about like the Kyler stuff.
Petzing to me, we did a lot of Petzing work. I feel like last year, Jacob, both like preseason and then in season. The way I think he runs his offense is through the run game. And so I do like the diversity in his run game. I think he does a really good job with that. We've seen that with Connor. But I also think it benefits, and it's the reason why McBride is such a big fantasy contributor, because McBride doesn't score touchdowns, and he didn't at Colorado State either. I always bring this up because it's important to me. That's why people are like, oh, McBride, the regression's coming with the touchdowns. Is it? Because it certainly didn't come at Colorado State, and I don't really feel like it's his profile. But for between the 20s, it's how he operates that offense. A lot of play action. It's a lot of boot. It's a lot of things to get design reads, in my mind at least, for the quarterback, who I believe that he's not fully comfortable with operating a drop back pass game. There's been a lot of concern with Petzing of how is he using Marvin Harrison Jr. I think, Jacob, you did a good job earlier kind of breaking down how that improved after the bye. But I think to me, a lot of that is just based on his feelings on the quarterback and what he can do to move an offense. So I like Petzing. I just think he's working kind of with a limited skill set at quarterback.
Yeah, 7th in yards per play were the Cardinals overall. And I brought them up. So we had a really tough time ranking Kyler when you watch the film and just get frustrated with the limitations and the fact that we're still doing this in year 6 or 7 or whatever. It's frustrating for both of us. But where I came to is like they're top 10 in so many of these efficiency metrics. And they were like, I think 10th or 11th in total offensive yards created. So either Kyler deserves to be better because he's creating problems for defenses, or Drew Petzing is like one of the most slept on offensive designers and play callers in the league. And I'm kind of fine with either one of those. I did find the rushing stats. Finally, the Cardinals were 11th in rush success rate, but were 4th in yards per running back rush because they created a ton of explosive plays, which again, I think is a Petzing stat. James Conner was awesome at avoiding tackles and creating yards after contact and making explosive plays. But so much of that was, to be there without an offensive line that's really moving people, I think says a lot about the design of the run game. If you remember, Dan, at the beginning of the season last year, I was getting so excited about what they were doing with all the pin pull action. They're doing a lot of creative stuff to get their running backs in space, a lot of counters and stuff like that I thought were set up really well for the theoretical skill set of Trey Benson. He ran more counters. A higher percentage of his runs were counters than any running back's been drafted over the past 5 years. So it was like Petzing clearly is very intentional in the way that he's designing things, and he's willing to try and do things that are unorthodox, and that has me curious about him at the very least. I don't know. I think he belongs basically in the same tier as Kellen Moore, but maybe just below because they don't play as fast. But I did want to get your guys' thoughts on them because they're such a weird offense. How many offenses are running through a tight end and don't have a speed threat and don't have a good offensive line? And
not only do they not have a good offensive line, they were the second most injured offensive line last year. Their most frequent offensive line combination, 19.9% of their snaps last year.
That's crazy.
They had 3 different right guards play 200 snaps last year. They didn't add anybody, so they're just banking on being healthier. So.
Yeah, they literally drafted all defense. So I guess they're just hoping to just truly bully people with James Conner on the ground.
Their schedule was pretty rough last year. It does alleviate a little bit on paper, so maybe that helps a little bit. But like you said, the Kyler stuff, it's just so hard to bet because Kyler hasn't gotten over that hump and hasn't really shown us that we should have confidence in getting over there.
It's such a weird offense. Does anyone have any interest in Michael Wilson? Well, we're deep in the weeds. No, okay.
Not fantasy. I do like him as a player, but not fantasy.
That's fair. I like him as a player, and just because they do run so many 2 tight end sets, I think he could actually get decent targets. But it's only if you're really punting on the receiver position. All right, last guy I wanted to bring up was Zach Taylor. This is another offense that was shockingly good in terms of what they were able to do on the ground, 55% rushing success rate on running back runs. The Lions were second at 52%. The Ravens were at 51%. What we got from Bijan Robinson last year was really, honestly, like a historic outcome for a running back in terms of consistency. Does anyone know why Bijan Robinson can't create long runs? He doesn't have a run of more than 40 yards in 2 seasons. It doesn't make any sense to me. He's not as fast as Devon Achane or anything, but like he's a young, explosive guy, and for some reason we can't get any explosive plays. But still, the offense has been so good, especially under Robinson, because they've just been able to consistently churn out first downs, churn out successful plays. I've got a stat here. Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, compared to all running backs aged 23 or younger since 2000, in terms of just creating first downs, Edgerrin James at 123. And then you see Bijan Robinson at 102, which is fourth, tied with Ezekiel Elliott, and just behind Le'Veon Bell in that 2021 Jonathan Taylor season, where the offense just ran through him. So that's really impressive to me. Jahmyr Gibbs is sixth on this list, by the way, tied with Christian McCaffrey at the same age. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the successful play stuff. Almost 200. This is from scrimmage, so it's like rushing and receiving. Almost 200 successful plays for Bijan last year, which tied Christian McCaffrey. And this isn't just like, there's no age qualifier on this. This is like just the best running back seasons that we've seen. It tied Christian McCaffrey's best season in terms of total successful plays created at 199. The only guys that are higher are Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry. Of course, this doesn't matter unless you're in a points for first down league or whatever. I get that, but it's so impressive what Bijan did, and I don't think it's just him. He's a phenomenal talent, but I do think some credit belongs to Zach Taylor. Do you guys have any thoughts on the Falcons?
Zach Robinson, I know you, man. We've been
Zach Robinson, we're too deep in.
I'll let Rich start. I have a few things, but I want to let Rich start here.
I was encouraged year one of just the way he calibrated around what was working and what not. And that's what we like to see coordinators do, right? If something's not working, how do we try to fix it? We tried to see that early in the year where Kirk Cousins, when it was clear Kirk Cousins couldn't move, right? And they tried to call games around Kirk Cousins' just inability to move. They completely like abandon, using any play action, anything under center, which I don't think he wanted to use. But then when we got Michael Penix, we saw some changes. It was a very small sample, but they did jump into terms of like producing like touchdowns under Michael Penix in terms of like yards per play and excitement. We saw that for Drake London. So I just like that when you see coaches make adjustments, and we just want to see that because we take some of that stuff for granted, right? We think it happens a lot more often than it really does in the NFL, even though it's these guys' jobs. That's what I liked, is that he was willing to change things throughout the course of the season when it wasn't working. And that gives me more optimism that they're going to kind of facilitate the offense as what's working and what's not. And that gives me upside. The Falcons, I'm just generally excited about in general from like a scoring stance and a fantasy stance, because I just think they're going to be like the NFC Bengals this year, like how the Bengals were last year. I mean, they're counting on a lot of young players on defense to make some real jumps. They're counting on some kind of veterans that haven't really been great players in recent years to make some jumps. And they might just be in some shootouts, especially when you look at their schedule. I mean, you look at this opening run that the Falcons play: Buccaneers, Vikings, Panthers, Commanders, Bills, 49ers, Dolphins, Patriots. Like, these are all teams that can score points. And you can say, all right, well, maybe not the Panthers, but like the last time we've seen these teams play, they scored 65 points. So I just think the Falcons are going to be one of these like just bonanza teams, like these fantasy, like just real parties.
Yeah, I love that schedule that you brought up, because they did invest a ton into the defense, but it might be a slow start in like getting that to all come together, especially when they've got to go against so many high-scoring offenses. And I think the fact that they invested so much in the defense and didn't add anything to the offense is also exciting for the previously existing guys. I think it's going to be really concentrated on just those guys. I've got on the screen here for the YouTube people, I've got Drake London's target heat maps. And so you can see 2023, it was much more perimeter oriented, not very much work over the middle. And then last year he gets more slot work and just a much more complete route tree overall under Zach Robinson. And then I also thought it was cool that you can look at the targets with Michael Penix Jr. compared to Kirk Cousins. So I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on this potentially being a concern where Penix Jr. isn't pushing the ball over the middle of the field as much, isn't able to layer throws in as well because of the arm angle. But what I really like is, I mean, he had more completions. These red dots are completions, more completions to the perimeter past 10, 15 yards than Kirk did. And Kirk had like 14 games or whatever. So I think that's a huge note for London and Mooney, because both those guys were like top 8 in average separation score and win rate on out routes last year. I think the pairing with Penix is really good in that regard. But do you have any thoughts as it pertains to the middle of the field with Penix?
It's the marriage of both worlds, right? Because we know Zach Robinson, that scheme is going to get Drake London those looks, right? Like we see all the slot stuff went crazy last year compared to his first 2 years. And then, but when we had Kirk Cousins, it was like, again, to use the same comp that I used, like he was operating in like a very 2023 Michael Pittman capacity for most of the fantasy season. He had 100-yard game, was getting you a nice beta floor of points, and he had more touchdowns than that 23 Pittman, but like we weren't getting like the spike weeks. Then we get Michael Penix Jr. and we get the marriage of the free stuff, then the upside stuff put together. And that's when you see like those 2 monster games Drake London's able to put together at the end of the year and kind of give you that like, oh, all right, now when we could just get all of it together, the upside is here. And I think that's what Penix unlocks with this offense. And I'm willing to give Penix a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because let's go back to that Washington team, right? Ryan Grubb last year has a chance, gets fired. He made no adjustments. He's the opposite of what we saw Zach Robinson does. Roma Dunze gets drafted 9 overall. Pretty disappointing season. Jalen Polk, ghost, absolute ghost. And then Jalen McMillan comes on at the end of the year. But like the common denominator still of a guy that showed success was Michael Penix, like from that system. So like, I'm kind of willing to say like, all right, Michael Penix, he might be the piece that was actually driving that thing at Washington.
I like that. I mean, it's tough to say based just on what we saw,
right.
But that's a good thing to bring up, because it's not just what we saw. It's not just the 3-game sample size against bad defenses. It's like these other guys that were on his offense that looked so good did have kind of a slow start adjusting to the NFL. So maybe it was Penix that was kind of elevating things. And then Grubb too. Ryan Grubb like was not successful, was bounced after just 1 year. Was the play caller there. So maybe Penix is better than we think. I wish the Falcons point totals were higher. They're in the same range as the Cowboys and the Patriots. It shocked me that they were like just barely above the Patriots in terms of what betting markets are expecting for 2025. What I've got up on the screen here is the total PPR points produced by these offenses. We just talked about the Cardinals and the Falcons. They're ahead of Sean Payton's Broncos. And I don't think anybody would say that the quarterback position was necessarily better for the Falcons than it was for the Broncos. I don't think the offensive line was better for the Falcons than it was for the Broncos. Obviously, the skill position players are much better, but this is total points. I think it's interesting that
they were 6th in yards gained as an offense and 16th in touchdowns. Like that's like there's probably going to be some pull, and we did see it when Penix took over. I mean, they averaged a touchdown every 127 yards of offense when Penix took over, compared to 173 yards per touchdown with Kirk Cousins, which is the difference of being a top 10 team and a bottom 10 team.
All right, so let's kind of figure out where we would put these guys then, and I'll go in retroactively and create the graphic, because I do think it'll be fun to have everybody placed. Kellen Moore, do we feel like is below Todd Monken or in the same tier for fantasy? Dan, any thoughts?
With Moore after Monken for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think I would put in that C tier Moore, Kliff Kingsbury, Zach Taylor, probably still Zach Robinson just by default. But I think Zach Robinson is a guy, like we're open to these guys climbing, right? Like a Zach Robinson, it's just Liam Coen climbing, Ben Johnson climbing. It's just like we need more of the test outside of new environments, right?
Yeah. Okay. So Zach Robinson in this C tier as well. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. What about Kubiak? We kind of talked about it a little bit here and there. Do we have any thoughts on where he fits into this discussion? Is he clearly below that tier?
No, I don't think he's below that tier. I would put him maybe B, honestly.
I just have such a hard time with it because it was just 2 games. It was against the worst defenses. And then like beyond that, it was nothing. But
Rattler and Hainer.
I know. But like we've had some of these other teams we've talked about where they had similar situations with the offensive line going down and then still being able to produce, like Arizona. So you think he belongs in the same range as Petzing?
That's where I would put him. I might be convinced at C. Definitely not D for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Ben misheard us too. We don't have Zach Robinson over Kellen Moore.
Yeah, Robinson in the C tier, right?
Yeah, like he'd probably be in the back end because we just don't know. Like it's again, like we like some of the stuff, but like we need more of a sample size. Where Kellen Moore is a lot more.
Okay, Stefanski in B or C somewhere.
I would still put him in the Monken tier because I think
Yeah.
we need players, but
Zach
do we do
Taylor in
that?
this tier in B or C.
I would think he has to get the benefit out because his fantasy players have been really good.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
That's
Chase
good.
Brown, if you look at like Chase Brown on a per touch basis, like he wasn't that great of a player last year, but it's what we care about for fantasy football. We care about touchdowns, catches, and volume.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. All right. That helps me flesh out this B tier a little bit too. All right. Sweet. This was awesome, Reebs.
Yeah. Where are you putting Brian Schottenheimer?
I was
I'm
going to say
getting kind of excited.
No. Oh, you're excited for Shoddy.
Do you have any
I don't
thoughts on
think
Shoddy
so.
Reebs?
Well, the one guy I think that actually is good that we didn't talk about is Josh McDaniels.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say McDaniel. I was excited to potential, but
There's a reason Josh McDaniels kept getting chances to fail as a head coach is because you can coach some offense.
Correct.
Yeah, he's like the inverse of Ben Johnson and Liam Coen, where it's like now he only worries about offense. He doesn't have to do
those guys were Josh McDaniel
Right.
was those guys at one point.
Where do you think he belong? Is he B tier potentially?
I would put him in B, I think, right? Or
He's
Yeah,
a B
there's
for
a
me
lot.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I like his
That's
game
a
a
good.
lot.
I mean, think about the last time we seen him as a his last full year at the Raiders. That team punched above its weight class, and then that last year, with Cam Newton, the shell of Cam Newton, what he was able to coax out of, like that Cam Newton offense, and just to be competitive, that version of Cam Newton. I mean,
Completely agree.
he was pulling teeth that year.
That's why you're here, Reebs. You're the historian. You've got all of it. I completely overlooked that, but that's a good call.
Yeah, he's probably the one we most overlooked. Shoddy for me would be probably near the bottom. I think I'm intrigued to see Mike Kafka get a chance again with the Giants. The Giants were 12th in red zone offense with Kafka 2 years ago. They were just terrible every other year. I feel like he does a really good job of marrying the run and pass game. Just a guy to keep an eye on there. Closing notes for me. But yeah, I feel like we did a great job covering the top tier coordinators here. Reebs, thank you so much for taking over 2 hours to talk fantasy football with us and dive into it. This has been awesome. I didn't get a chance to do it at the top of the show, so please, can you let the listeners know a few things? One, where they can find your work, and two, anything you're working on or anything they can find coming up.
Yeah, if anyone's made it this far or does get here when they run this back on YouTube or their podcast, you'll definitely go to sharpfootballanalysis.com. I'm putting out a new series every week. Since we've come back from the holiday, I've done a new series for the draft kit. This week has been all about team regression stuff. It's red zone production, per drive production, turning yards into touchdowns, touchdown dispersal, to help us identify some of these teams that maybe have some top down recoil or that bounce back next year. So check that out. I will say if anyone made it this far, I will do something special for you guys. I know Jacob got in on the underdog deal. I can't quite run that one back, but if anyone made it this far and does want to check out the draft kit, you guys can use promo code TAKE50 and that'll be 50% off. It'll basically make it $15 for the rest of the season. I'll have a different series all the way to the start of the season that adds to that draft kit.
Excellent stuff. Thanks again, Rich, Jacob. As always, to the listeners who made this show possible, please hit the like button. Please leave a comment. Please help grow this show. We thank you, sickos, for joining us for 2 hours today. And that's the endearing term that Jacob uses for people that listen to our podcast. You're one of us. So have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.